The black stallion exploded through the corral fence like a cannonball, scattering men twice his age and sending the ranch foreman sprawling face first into the dirt. Blood, splintered wood, a woman's scream. Everyone knew what came next, a bullet, because that's what you did with a horse that couldn't be broken. But then a voice cut through the chaos, cold and commanding as a blade. "You will not touch that animal." Every head turned. Standing at the edge of the destruction was a woman who looked like she'd walked straight out of a funeral 50 years past. Black silk, silver hair, and eyes that had seen empires fall. If you want to see how a mysterious noblewoman transforms a dying ranch into a legend, stay until the end. And comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The heat that afternoon could melt iron. It rose in waves off the hard-packed Montana dirt, shimmering between the mountains and the sprawling ranch that squatted in the valley like something defeated. The Vale Ranch had seen better years. Hell, it had seen better decades. But Gideon Vale wasn't the kind of man who gave up on anything, even when giving up made sense. He stood at the fence line, hat pulled low, watching his men try for the third time that week to get a saddle on the black stallion they'd bought off a desperate rancher in Wyoming. The horse was magnificent and completely insane. Gideon had paid too much for him, banking on the idea that if he could break the animal, he could rebuild his breeding program. If he couldn't, he'd just lit money on fire. Vamos. "Easy now," Tom Bridger called out, his voice steady despite the sweat pouring down his temples. Tom was the best horseman Gideon had, 50 years old and built like a barrel. If anyone could handle the stallion, it was him. The horse stood in the center of the corral, black coat gleaming, muscles coiled tight as springs. His eyes rolled white at the edges. Tom moved slow, rope loose in his hands, talking low and constant. "Nobody's gonna hurt you, boy. Just gonna get you used to—" The stallion struck without warning. One moment he was standing still, the next he was a tornado of hooves and fury. Tom went down hard. Another hand, young Billy Patterson, tried to grab the lead rope and got dragged 10 feet before he had the sense to let go. The horse screamed, an awful sound, full of rage and something deeper, something that sounded almost like grief. "Jesus Christ," Gideon muttered, climbing through the fence rails. "Everybody back." The men scattered. The stallion wheeled toward Gideon, head high, ears pinned flat. They stared at each other across 20 feet of churned dirt. Gideon had broken hundreds of horses in his life. He knew the difference between an animal that was scared and one that was dangerous. This one was both. "Boss, he's gonna kill somebody." Tom had picked himself up, limping slightly. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye. Gideon didn't answer. He was doing calculations in his head, weighing pride against common sense. The horse had cost him nearly everything he had left, but a dead ranch hand would cost him more. "Get my rifle," he said finally. The words fell into the afternoon like stones into still water. Nobody moved. "Boss? Get the damn rifle, Tom." That was when she spoke. "You will not touch that animal." Every man in the yard turned toward the voice. She stood near the barn, partially in shadow, but even from a distance, Gideon could see she didn't belong. Not here, not in Montana, not anywhere west of the Mississippi. She was old, not ancient, but past the age where most women out here had either died or gone soft. 60, maybe. Silver hair pulled back severe from a face that must have been beautiful once, and was still striking in a way that had nothing to do with softness. She wore black, head to toe, the kind of dress you saw in daguerreotypes of European aristocracy. Expensive fabric, even if it had seen hard travel. Her posture was military straight despite the heat. "Ma'am," Gideon said carefully, "this ain't your concern." She stepped into the sunlight, and he got a better look at her. Pale skin that hadn't seen much sun, hands that had never worked a field, eyes the color of winter sky and just as cold. She studied the stallion with an intensity that made Gideon's neck prickle. "That horse is terrified," she said. Her accent was British, clipped and precise. "He is not vicious. There is a difference." Tom snorted. "Lady, that horse just about killed me. I know vicious when I see it." She didn't even glance at Tom. Her attention stayed locked on the stallion, who had gone utterly still, watching her the way a wolf watches movement in the trees. "You see violence," she said quietly. I see a creature that has been betrayed and expects nothing else. And you know this how? Gideon kept his voice level, but his patience was wearing thin. The afternoon was getting away from him. His best man was bleeding, and now some English lady was giving him horse philosophy. She turned those cold eyes on him, and for just a second Gideon felt like he was being weighed and measured by someone who'd done this to better men. "I know it," she said, "because I have stood exactly where he is standing." The silence that followed was broken only by the stallion's harsh breathing and the distant call of a hawk. "Boss," Billy said nervously, "we doing this or not?" Gideon studied the woman. She was insane, probably. Rich people from back east sometimes came west looking for adventure or redemption or whatever the hell rich people looked for when they got bored. Most of them lasted about a week before scurrying back to civilization. But something about her made him pause. She didn't look bored. She looked like someone who had burned down her whole life and was standing in the ashes trying to decide what to build next. "You got a name?" he asked. "Lady Rowena Ashcroft." She said it the way most people would say, "Good morning," like it was just a fact, nothing special. "Lady," Tom repeated, heavy on the sarcasm. "Well, ain't that fancy?" "It is merely a title," Rowena said. "I have found that titles mean remarkably little when one has lost everything else." That got Gideon's attention. He gestured toward the stallion. "You think you can do something with him?" "I believe he deserves the chance to prove he is more than his fear." "That's not what I asked." She met his eyes, and Gideon saw something flicker there, not quite a smile, but close. "No, it is not. Smart." She was smart. Gideon made another calculation, this one faster. 3 days, he said. "You got 3 days to show me something. He tries to kill you. That's on you. He tries to kill one of my men. I put him down. We clear?" "Perfectly. Tom, get the lady some water and show her where the horse is going to be penned. Separate from the others." Gideon turned away before he could change his mind, heading toward the house. He had paperwork to do, accounts to balance, 100 things more important than watching some titled Englishwoman get herself trampled. Behind him, he heard Tom's skeptical voice. "You got any experience with horses, ma'am?" "Some," Rowena replied, "though it has been quite a long time." Gideon didn't turn around, but he smiled despite himself. 3 days. She'd probably be begging for a ride to the nearest town by tomorrow morning. He was wrong about that, as it turned out. Very wrong. The sun was barely up when Gideon came out of the house the next morning, coffee in hand. He'd slept poorly, kept awake by thoughts of the ranch's finances, and the nagging feeling he'd made another stupid decision. Letting that woman try to work with the stallion was like letting a child play with dynamite. Noble or not, she was going to get hurt. He stopped short when he saw her. Rowena stood outside the stallion's pen, perfectly still, hands clasped behind her back. She'd been there long enough that dew had settled on her black dress. The horse stood on the far side of the corral, equally motionless, watching her. "Morning," Gideon called. She didn't turn. "Good morning, Mr. Vale." "You been out here all night?" "Not quite all. I slept for a few hours." She tilted her head slightly, still focused on the horse. He did not sleep at all. Every time he started to relax, he would startle himself awake. Exhausting, I imagine. Gideon moved closer. In the early light, he could see the fatigue in her face, the way she held herself just a fraction less perfectly than yesterday. But her eyes were alert. "You just planning to stare at each other?" "For now." She finally glanced at him. "Horses are not unlike people, Mr. Vale. They form opinions quickly and change them slowly. He has decided I am either a threat or irrelevant. Until he decides otherwise, any approach would be premature." "You English always talk like you swallowed a dictionary?" "Only when we wish to avoid saying what we actually mean." That surprised a laugh out of him. "And what do you actually mean?" She was quiet for a moment, watching the stallion. "I mean that he and I are both displaced creatures attempting to survive in a world that would prefer we simply disappear. It makes us cautious." The words hung in the air between them, too heavy for a casual morning conversation. Gideon drank his coffee, studying her profile. She had the kind of face that made you wonder what she'd looked like at 20, at 30. What kind of life wore a woman down to this particular shape? "Where'd you come from?" he asked. "Before Montana." "Before Montana?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "England. obviously. Before that, India, briefly. Before that, she trailed off, watching the stallion shift his weight. Before that hardly matters. You running from something. Aren't we all, Mr. Vale? It's Gideon. She turned to look at him fully then, and he saw her truly for the first time. Not as an oddity or a problem, but as a person. The exhaustion was deeper than one sleepless night. It was carved into the lines around her mouth, the set of her shoulders. This was someone who had been running on sheer will for so long she'd forgotten how to stop. Rowena, she said after a moment. Rowena. He tested the name, found it fit her better than Lady Ashcroft. You need breakfast, Rowena. Can't work on an empty stomach. The horse will still be there in an hour. Gideon gestured toward the main house. Come on, I'll have Maria make eggs. She hesitated, glancing back at the stallion. The animal hadn't moved, but his ears had swiveled forward, tracking her. Very well, she said finally, but only briefly. Maria Sanchez had been cooking for the Vale Ranch for 15 years, since her husband Miguel signed on as foreman and brought his family north from Texas. She took one look at Rowena and immediately began fussing, pulling out a chair, pouring coffee, talking in a rapid mix of English and Spanish about how skinny the lady was, how nobody should be up all night without food. Didn't she know Montana winters were harsh enough without starving yourself first? Rowena bore it with remarkable patience, though Gideon saw her hands tighten slightly on the coffee cup when Maria asked where her family was. I have no family, Rowena said quietly. Not anymore. Maria's expression softened immediately. She patted Rowena's shoulder and said something in Spanish that Gideon didn't catch but understood anyway. Loss was universal. Grief didn't need translation. They ate in relative silence. Eggs, bacon, fresh bread. Rowena ate slowly, methodically, like someone who had learned to make small portions last. It made Gideon wonder when she'd last had a proper meal. So what's your plan? He asked finally, pushing his plate back. With the horse. Rowena finished chewing, dabbed her mouth with a napkin that Maria had insisted she use. There is no plan, precisely, only principles. Which are? Patience, consistency, respect. She set down her fork. That horse has been brutalized, Gideon. Perhaps not intentionally, but the result is the same. Someone tried to break him using force, and when he fought back, they used more force. Now he believes all humans are enemies. So you're going to prove him wrong. Well, I'm going to give him the opportunity to reach that conclusion himself. Tom appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. Boss, we got a problem with the water pump. Miguel says... He stopped when he saw Rowena. Oh, morning, ma'am. Good morning, Mr. Bridger. It's just Tom. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. Look, about yesterday, I didn't mean... You meant precisely what you said, Rowena interrupted, not unkindly. And you were not wrong to be skeptical. I am a stranger making extraordinary claims. Trust must be earned. Tom blinked, clearly not expecting that. Well, yeah, I suppose. Gideon stood, grabbing his hat. Show me the pump. Rowena, take your time, but stay out of that corral until I get back. She inclined her head slightly. Of course. He didn't miss the way she said it, agreeable on the surface, but with just enough reserve to suggest she'd do exactly as she pleased once he was out of sight. The water pump problem took most of the morning to diagnose and fix. By the time Gideon made it back to the stallion's pen, the sun was high and brutal. He found Rowena exactly where he'd left her, though she'd moved about 10 feet closer to the fence. The stallion had also moved. He was nearer now, maybe 20 feet from where she stood, still wary, still tense, but closer. You been standing there all this time? Gideon asked. With occasional movement, she didn't turn. He is curious. That is progress. He looks ready to bolt. He is always ready to bolt, but he has not bolted. That is the difference. Gideon leaned against the fence, watching. The horse's attention was fixed on Rowena with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable to witness. It reminded him of how wild animals watched predators, total focus, waiting for the attack they knew was coming. What happened to you? Gideon asked quietly. Before you came here. For a long moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, my husband died 3 years ago. Earl of something or other, though by the end we had more title than money. He gambled poorly and invested worse. When he passed, I discovered we were bankrupt. The estate, the houses, everything, gone to creditors. Her voice was matter-of-fact, like she was reading from a ledger. I sold what little remained and bought passage to America. I have been traveling ever since, looking for— I'm not entirely sure what I'm looking for. But you ended up here. The stagecoach stopped in town for repairs. I saw your notice seeking experienced hands. It seemed as good a direction as any. Gideon turned that over. You answered a help-wanted ad for ranch work. Is that so difficult to believe? Lady, you're wearing a dress that probably costs more than I make in a year. Yeah, it's a little hard to believe. She finally looked at him, and there was something almost amused in her expression. This dress is 12 years old and has been repaired so many times the original fabric is more memory than reality. But it is all I have left of a particular life, so I wear it. Pride, Mr. Vale, Gideon, is often the last thing we surrender. Before he could respond, the stallion moved. Just a few steps, head low, snorting softly. Rowena went absolutely still, barely breathing. The horse stretched his neck out, nostrils flaring, trying to catch her scent. Easy, she murmured. I am no threat to you. The stallion took another step, then another. He was at the fence now, separated from Rowena by 6 inches of air and 100 pounds of terror. Don't move, Gideon said quietly. I have no intention of moving. The horse's breath came in short huffs. His eyes were still wild, still waiting for the trap. But he didn't bolt. Slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, Rowena raised one hand. Easy, she said again. Just a hand, nothing more. The stallion's ears went back. Gideon tensed, ready to grab Rowena and pull her back if the horse struck, but the animal just stood there, trembling, trying to decide. Rowena's hand stopped about a foot from the horse's nose. She didn't reach further, just held it there, letting him make the choice. That's it, she murmured. You decide, I will not force you. The moment stretched impossibly long. Then, so quickly Gideon almost missed it, the stallion extended his muzzle and touched her palm. Just a brush. There and gone. But it happened. Rowena didn't react beyond a slight exhale. Good, she said softly. Very good. The horse jerked back, wheeled, and bolted to the far side of the pen. But the damage, or maybe the healing, was done. He'd made contact, chosen it, even for a second. Gideon realized he'd been holding his breath. Well, I'll be damned. It is only a beginning, Rowena said, but her voice carried something that might have been hope. Tomorrow will be harder. She was right about that, too. The ranch hands started gathering at the corral the next morning like it was a spectator sport. Word had spread about the English lady and the black horse, and nobody wanted to miss what happened next. Tom tried to shoo them away, but even he kept finding reasons to work nearby. Rowena arrived at dawn again, wearing the same black dress, her hair pulled back with ruthless efficiency. She'd slept better, Gideon could tell, but there was a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there yesterday. Worried? He asked. Terrified, she admitted, which surprised him. What I did yesterday was establish the possibility of trust. Today I must prove it is deserved. If I fail, I lose everything I gained. You could wait, give him another day of just watching. She shook her head. No, he will not respect hesitation. I must show him I am committed. Gideon didn't argue. He'd seen enough of her by now to know that once Rowena decided on a course, she followed it like steel ran through her spine instead of bone. She entered the corral. The reaction was immediate. The stallion, who'd been dozing in the far corner, came fully alert. His head shot up, ears pinned back. A warning sound rumbled from his chest. Rowena stopped about 10 feet inside the gate. She didn't look at the horse directly, instead keeping her gaze soft, unfocused. Good morning, she said conversationally, as if greeting a neighbor. I thought we might continue our acquaintance. The horse stamped. Dust rose in small clouds. I understand this is your space, Rowena continued, taking 2 steps to the side, not toward him, just moving. I am merely visiting, with your permission. She's talking to him like he's people, one of the hands muttered. Shut up, Tom hissed. Rowena circled slowly, always at the same distance, never approaching. The stallion tracked her movement but didn't charge. After about 5 minutes of this, she sat down, just lowered herself to the dirt and sat cross-legged, hands in her lap. "What's she doing?" Billy whispered. "Making herself smaller," Gideon said, "less threatening." The stallion stared at her. Minutes passed. The morning sun climbed higher. Flies buzzed. Somewhere in the distance, Maria called out to Miguel about something. Normal ranch sounds, normal ranch life, going on around this strange tableau. Then the horse took a step toward her. Every man at the fence tensed. Rowena didn't move. The stallion took another step. Another. He was maybe 15 feet away now, head high, nostrils flaring, trying to understand what kind of predator sits down in your territory and just waits. "Come if you wish," Rowena said quietly. "I will not chase you. I will not trap you. I am simply here." Another step, 10 feet now. Close enough that if he charged, she'd have no time to get up and run. Close enough to kill her. Gideon's hand went to the fence rail, ready to vault it. Tom grabbed his arm. "Wait," Tom breathed. "Just wait." The stallion lowered his head, stretching his neck out. Rowena remained absolutely still, barely breathing. The horse took one more step, and now he was close enough to touch her. His breath stirred the silver hair that had escaped her severe style. He snorted, blowing dust across her black dress. "Hello," Rowena said, so softly Gideon almost didn't hear it. "Hello, beautiful boy." The stallion's ears came forward. Just a fraction, but it happened. He took one more step, and now he was standing directly over her, this massive animal that could kill her with a single kick, and Rowena sat beneath him like a queen on a throne made of trust and insanity. Slowly, carefully, she raised one hand. The horse's eyes tracked the movement, but he didn't bolt. Her fingers found his shoulder, just a light touch, there and gone. "You see?" she murmured. "No harm, just acknowledgement." The horse stood there for maybe 30 seconds, which felt like an hour. Then he stepped back, wheeled, and trotted to the far side of the corral, snorting and shaking his head like he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Rowena sat for another minute before standing, brushing dust from her dress with brisk efficiency. When she turned toward the fence, her face was composed, but Gideon could see the trembling in her hands. "Day 2, she said as she exited the corral. "Complete." The hands erupted in conversation, already turning what they'd seen into a story they'd tell for years. Tom just shook his head, half amazed, half disbelieving. "I wouldn't have thought it possible." "Neither would I," Rowena admitted. She looked exhausted, wrung out, like she'd run a race uphill. But possible and probable are different creatures. Gideon waited until the others dispersed before speaking. "You know you're insane, right?" "Oh, yes." She gave him a tired smile. "Absolutely mad. But what else was I going to do? Be sensible? Sensibility is vastly overrated. That horse could have killed you. So could 1,000 other things. Cholera, childbirth, poverty, heartbreak." She met his eyes. "I have survived them all." A frightened horse seemed like manageable odds. There was a story there, Gideon knew. Probably several stories. But before he could ask, Maria appeared with water and lunch, fussing over Rowena like she was made of spun glass. That afternoon, Gideon found himself watching Rowena instead of working. She'd taken up her vigil outside the corral again, just standing there, patient as stone. The stallion would occasionally move closer, then retreat, testing the boundaries of this new strange dynamic. "You're staring, boss," Miguel said, appearing at Gideon's elbow with the subtlety of a freight train. "I'm observing." "Observing," Miguel grinned. "Maria says she is a lady, like actual nobility." "So she says." "You believe her?" Gideon considered. "Yeah, I do. Can't fake that kind of, I don't know what to call it, bearing, maybe. She holds herself like she's still standing in a palace even when she's covered in Montana dust." "Beautiful woman," Miguel observed. "For her age." "Miguel." "What?" "I'm just saying, Maria noticed too, said she has good bones, whatever that means." Gideon snorted. "Your wife notices everything." "This is true. She also notices you watching the lady with what she calls interest." Miguel's grin widened. "Should I be concerned about my job security? You gonna run off with some English countess?" "She's not a countess, and I'm not—" Gideon stopped, realizing he was defending himself to his foreman, about something that hadn't even happened. Don't you have work to do? Always. But Miguel didn't move. She's doing good work with that horse, though. Never seen anything like it. Tom says it's witchcraft. Tom's an idiot. Tom's been around horses for 50 years and never saw anybody gentle one like that. Makes him nervous. Makes us all nervous, Gideon admitted. But it's working. So far. Tomorrow's the real test, though, yeah? Day 3. Day 3, Gideon agreed, feeling something tighten in his chest. Tomorrow Rowena would try to ride the stallion, if she stuck to her plan. And if she did, one of two things would happen. She'd succeed, which would be a miracle, or she'd get thrown and probably killed, which would be a tragedy but not surprising. He realized he very much did not want her to die. That thought followed him through dinner, through the evening chores, through the hours lying in bed staring at the ceiling. Somewhere between meeting this strange woman and watching her sit in the dirt with a killer horse, Gideon had started to care what happened to her. It was inconvenient and probably stupid, but there it was. He finally gave up on sleep around 4 in the morning and went outside. The moon was setting, turning everything silver and shadow. And there, at the corral fence, was a figure in black. "You ever actually sleep?" Gideon asked, walking up beside her. "Not when there is thinking to be done." Rowena didn't look away from the stallion, who was dozing near the water trough. "Tomorrow will either vindicate every risk I have taken or prove I am nothing more than a foolish old woman playing at relevance." "That what you think you're doing? Playing?" "Sometimes I am not sure. I spent so many years being what others needed me to be, wife, hostess, ornament. When all that ended, I discovered I had no idea who I was without those roles. So perhaps I am playing, trying on new identities to see what fits." Gideon leaned against the fence. "And how's Horse Whisperer fit?" She smiled slightly. "Better than I expected. Worse than I hoped. I am terrified, Gideon. You could walk away. Nobody would blame you." "I would blame me." She turned to face him fully. "I am 62 years old. I have buried a husband, lost a fortune, and crossed an ocean to escape a life that had become unbearable. If I cannot do this one thing that might actually matter, then what was the point of surviving all the rest?" The raw honesty of it hit Gideon like a physical blow. He'd spent so many years keeping people at arm's length, protecting the ranch and himself from anything that might destabilize the careful balance he'd built. And here was this woman, tearing through all that careful distance like it was tissue paper. "The point," he said slowly, "is that you're here, that you tried. That's worth something." "Is it?" "Has to be. Otherwise none of us are worth a damn." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the moonlight fade and the first hints of dawn color the eastern sky. The stallion woke, shaking himself, and looked directly at Rowena. Even from this distance, Gideon could see the calculation in the animal's eyes. Whatever happened today would determine not just the horse's future, but Rowena's. And maybe, in some way he didn't fully understand yet, his own. "Sun's coming up," Gideon said finally. "You ready?" Rowena straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and in that moment Gideon could see exactly what she must have looked like in her palace or manor or wherever English nobility lived. Commanding, regal, absolutely terrifying. "No," she said, "but I will do it anyway." By the time the sun fully rose, what felt like the entire ranch had gathered. Word had spread through the bunkhouse, through town, probably all the way to Canada by now. The English lady was going to ride the Black Devil, and nobody wanted to miss either the miracle or the disaster. Gideon had tried to convince her to wait, to take more time, but Rowena had been firm. "I gave you 3 days. This is the 3rd. If I hesitate now, I lose his respect and mine." She entered the corral while Gideon's heart tried to climb out of his throat. The stallion watched her approach, ears alert but not pinned. Progress, maybe, or the calm before the storm. "Good morning," Rowena said, her voice steady. "We have an understanding, you and I. Today I ask you to trust that understanding completely." The horse snorted. Rowena continued walking, slow and deliberate, until she stood beside him. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then she placed both hands on his back, just resting them there. The stallion's muscles twitched, but he didn't move, didn't bolt. Rowena ran her hands along his spine, his shoulders, his neck, talking the whole time in that low, calm voice. Gideon couldn't hear the words, but the tone was clear, respect, admiration, partnership. Then she did something that made every man at the fence suck in a breath. She took hold of the stallion's mane and pulled herself up, not all the way, just enough to lay across his back, testing his reaction. The horse sidestepped nervously but didn't explode. Rowena held her position, still talking, still calm. After what felt like an eternity, she slid back down. "That was smart," Tom muttered. "Test it first." "She knows what she's doing," Gideon said, though his hands were gripped white on the fence rail. Rowena walked away from the horse, then back, then touched his back again. Building confidence, Gideon realized. Hers and the stallion's both. After the third time, she gathered the mane again, and this time swung her leg over, settling fully onto the horse's back. Time stopped. The stallion froze, every muscle tensed. Rowena sat perfectly still, her black dress pooled around her, silver hair bright in the sun. She looked like some ancient goddess, fierce and unbreakable. "Walk with me," she said softly. "Just walk." The horse's ears flicked forward, back, forward again. Then slowly, carefully, he took a step, then another. He was walking, and Rowena was riding him, and the entire ranch held its collective breath. They made it maybe 20 feet before the stallion spooked at something. A bird, a shadow, his own fear. He reared up, not the violent explosion of days before, but enough to send Rowena sliding backwards. She grabbed for his mane, caught herself, and somehow, impossibly, stayed on. "Easy," she said, and there was steel in her voice now. "I did not ask you to run. I asked you to walk." The horse came down, all 4 feet hitting earth. He danced sideways, snorting, still afraid but listening, still trying. "That's better," Rowena's voice softened. "Now, shall we try again?" And they did. Step by careful step, Rowena rode the black stallion around the corral. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't smooth, but it was real. And it was happening. And by the time she finally slid off and stood on shaking legs beside him, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. She rested her forehead against the stallion's neck for just a moment, then turned toward the fence. Her face was composed but streaked with dust and sweat. When she walked out of the corral, Gideon was there to catch her as her legs finally gave out. "I've got you," he said. "Did you see?" she whispered. "Did you see what we did?" "Yeah." His voice was rough. "I saw." The hands erupted in cheers. Maria pushed through the crowd with water and what looked like half the kitchen. Tom stood there shaking his head, and when Rowena looked at him, he just said, "Ma'am, you are either the bravest woman I ever met or the craziest, maybe both." "Both," Rowena agreed, accepting water with trembling hands. "Definitely both." Gideon helped her to a bench in the shade, waving off the crowd. They needed a moment, just the two of them, to process what had just happened. When the noise finally died down, he sat beside her. 3 days, he said. "You did it in 3 days." "We did it," she corrected. "That horse and I, and you, for giving us the chance." "What now?" She looked at him, and Gideon saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not quite hope, but maybe its cousin. "That depends. Is your offer of employment still available? Or was it contingent on success?" "You want to stay?" "I want to finish what we started. That horse deserves more than 3 days. He deserves a future. So do I." She paused. "If you'll have me." Gideon thought about the ranch, about the struggling horse program he'd been trying to rebuild, about the years of careful isolation he'd built around himself. Then he thought about this fierce, broken, beautiful woman who'd walked into his life and turned everything sideways in less than 72 hours. "Yeah," he said, "I'll have you. Fair wage, room in the house, meals with the family, and that stallion is yours to work with. Build him into something special." "We will build him together," Rowena said. "That is how this works, I think. Partnership." "Partnership," Gideon agreed. And when their eyes met, he saw the beginning of something neither of them had planned for, but both of them needed more than air. The sun climbed higher, the ranch returned to work. And in the corral, the black stallion stood watching the woman in black, ears forward, already waiting for tomorrow. The room Gideon showed her to wasn't much. A small space off the main house with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. But it had a door that closed and a roof that didn't leak. which made it a palace compared to the boarding houses Rowena had endured over the past 3 years. "It's not fancy," Gideon said, standing in the doorway like he wasn't quite sure if he was allowed to enter. "It's perfect." Rowena set down the single carpet bag that contained everything she owned. "Thank you." He nodded, still not moving. There was something he wanted to say. She could see it in the way he shifted his weight, opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, "That thing you did today, with the horse. I've been working livestock my whole life, and I've never seen anything like it." "I told you, I simply gave him a choice." "Most people don't think horses need choices." "Most people are wrong about a great many things." Rowena moved to the window, looking out at the corral where the stallion stood in the fading light. "We are not so different from animals, you know. We all need the same things: safety, purpose, the sense that we matter to someone. Take those away and we become dangerous, or we break. Sometimes both." Gideon was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was careful. "You talking about the horse or yourself?" "Does it matter?" "Maybe not." He stepped into the room properly now, closing the distance between them. "Look, I don't know what brought you here or what you're running from. That's your business. But you should know, people around here, they talk. And a titled English lady working on a Montana horse ranch is going to give them plenty to talk about." "Let them talk." Rowena turned to face him. "I stopped caring what people thought of me the day I discovered my husband had mortgaged our home to cover gambling debts and failed to mention it before dying. Pride is a luxury, Gideon. I can no longer afford it." "That's not what I see when I look at you." "No? What do you see?" He held her gaze, and Rowena felt something shift in the air between them. Someone who's got more spine than sense. Someone who sat in the dirt with a killer horse because she thought it deserved a chance. He paused. "Someone who scares the hell out of me." "I scare you?" "Yeah, because I think you might actually pull this off. And if you do, I'm going to have to figure out what to do with you." Rowena smiled slightly. "I am not a problem to be solved, Mr. Vale." "Gideon, and that's not what I meant." But he didn't explain what he did mean, and after a moment he just tipped his hat and left, closing the door behind him with a gentleness that felt deliberate. Rowena stood there for a long time, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. Then she sank onto the bed and let herself shake properly for the first time all day. Her hands trembled so badly she had to clasp them together. Her legs felt like water. The adrenaline that had carried her through the morning was gone, leaving nothing but exhaustion and the sharp awareness of how close she'd come to dying. But she hadn't died. She'd ridden that horse. She'd proven something to the ranch, to Gideon, and most importantly to herself. That had to count for something. Maria knocked softly before entering with a tray. "Dinner," she announced, setting it on the small table by the window. "You eat. You look like a ghost." "I feel rather like one." "Ghosts don't tame horses." Maria's expression was shrewd. "You sleep now, yes? Tomorrow you need strength." "Tomorrow?" "You think one ride is enough? That horse, he will test you again. And again, until he knows you mean it." Maria patted Rowena's shoulder. "But you will be ready. I see it in you. The strong ones. We always recognize each other." After Maria left, Rowena ate mechanically. Stew, bread, something that might have been apple pie. Then fell into bed still half dressed. She was asleep before full dark, and she dreamed of running through endless corridors in a house that kept changing shape, always searching for something she couldn't name. She woke to pale dawn light and the sound of men's voices outside. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it came back. Montana. The ranch. The horse. She dressed quickly in the same black dress, now more dust than silk, and stepped outside. Tom and Miguel stood by the corral, watching the stallion pace restlessly. They both turned when they heard her approach. "Morning, ma'am," Miguel said. "We were just discussing whether you'd be crazy enough to try again today." "And what did you conclude?" Tom snorted. "That you're definitely crazy enough." "Then you know me better than I thought." Rowena studied the horse. He looked agitated, ears flat, muscles tense. "What's wrong with him?" "Nothing's wrong," Tom said. "He's just working himself up. Happens sometimes after a big change. Like he can't quite believe what happened and he's trying to convince himself it was a mistake. Rowena understood that feeling better than she wanted to admit. I should go to him. Maybe give it an hour, Miguel suggested. Let him settle. No, waiting will only make it worse. She was already moving toward the gate. For both of us. Stubborn, Tom muttered, but he didn't try to stop her. The moment Rowena entered the corral, the stallion charged. Not a full attack, more like a warning, a rush of speed and power designed to make her retreat. She stood her ground, feet planted, and at the last second the horse veered off, thundering past so close she felt the heat of him. Easy, she said, though her heart was trying to punch through her ribs. We've already established this game. You cannot frighten me away. The stallion wheeled around, breathing hard, staring at her with those wild eyes. Rowena stared back. You regret yesterday, she said. I understand. Trust is terrifying, especially when you've learned that trusting gets you hurt. But I'm still here, and I will be here tomorrow, and the day after, until you understand that I am not leaving. The horse snorted, pawed the ground, but he didn't charge again. Rowena sat down in the dirt, just like she had on the second day. So, shall we begin again? It took nearly 2 hours before the stallion approached her. When he finally did, moving cautiously, testing every step, Rowena didn't move. She let him come to her, let him remember that yesterday hadn't been a trick or a trap. When his nose touched her shoulder, gentle as snow, she released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. There you are, she murmured. Welcome back. She spent the rest of that day simply being with the horse. No riding, no pressure, just presence. By late afternoon, the stallion was following her around the corral like an enormous, dangerous dog. I'll be damned, Tom said from the fence. It's like he's courting her. Other way around, maybe, Gideon replied. He'd been watching from the porch, trying to work on the ranch accounts, and failing completely. Something about Rowena pulled at his attention like gravity. She's showing him he matters. That's different than breaking. Still don't trust it, Tom said. Horse that wild, there's always a chance he'll snap. There's always a chance any of us will snap. Gideon closed his ledger with more force than necessary. Difference is, she's giving him a reason not to. Over the next week, Rowena established a routine. Dawn to noon in the corral with the stallion. Afternoon helping wherever she was needed, mending tack, organizing the feed storage, even mucking stalls despite Maria's horrified protests that ladies didn't shovel manure. Evenings she spent at dinner with Gideon, Maria, and Miguel, slowly becoming part of the ranch's rhythm. The transformation in the horse was remarkable. By the 5th day, he was letting Rowena saddle him. By the 7th, she was riding him around the corral without incident. By the 10th, she took him outside the fence, and the stallion didn't bolt. He walked calmly beside her, ears forward, trusting. You're going to need a name for him, Gideon said one evening. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. It had become a habit, these quiet conversations at the end of the day. I've been calling him Tempest. It seemed appropriate. Tempest. Gideon tested it. Yeah, that fits. Rowena was quiet for a moment, watching Tempest graze peacefully in the paddock. Gideon, I need to ask you something. Ask? Why did you really let me try? 3 days ago, when I made that ridiculous claim about saving the horse, you could have laughed me off the ranch. You probably should have. But you didn't. Why? He took his time answering, rolling a cigarette he had no intention of smoking. You want the honest answer? Always. Because you looked at that horse the way I look at this ranch, like it was your last chance at something, and I figured anyone desperate enough to bet everything on a killer horse deserved at least a shot at proving themselves right. He paused. Also, you reminded me of my mother. That surprised her. Your mother? She died when I was 12, cancer, they said, though out here it could have been 100 things. But before she got sick, she was fierce, took no nonsense from anyone. My father was a drunk and a bully, and she stood between him and me more times than I can count. Gideon finally met her eyes. She would have walked into that corral without hesitation, just like you did. I'm sorry you lost her. Long time ago now. But the way he said it made Rowena think it wasn't that long at all. Some losses stayed fresh no matter how many years passed. My mother died when I was 16, Rowena offered. Childbirth. The baby died too. After that, it was just my father and me in that enormous house. He married me off at 18 to a man twice my age because it secured a business merger. I didn't see him again after the wedding. He died 3 years later. Heart failure, they said. I think it was loneliness. You ever happy in that marriage? Rowena considered the question. Happy? No. But I was useful. I ran his household, hosted his parties, made him look respectable to his peers. There's a certain satisfaction in competence, even when there's no joy in it. That's a hell of a way to spend a life. Yes, it was. She looked at him directly, which is why I have no intention of spending what remains of my life that way. I would rather die trying something impossible than survive doing nothing at all. Gideon held her gaze, and something unspoken passed between them. You're going to be trouble, aren't you? Almost certainly. He laughed, a real laugh that transformed his usually serious face. Well, at least I'll see it coming. But trouble arrived from a direction neither of them expected. 2 weeks after Rowena's arrival, a rider came into the yard at full gallop, pulling up in a cloud of dust. He was young, maybe 20, with the look of someone who'd ridden hard and scared. Mr. Vale, he shouted. Sir, there's been an accident, the Patterson place. Their barn's on fire and Sam Patterson's trapped inside. Gideon was already moving, calling for Miguel and Tom. How far? 5 miles west. But sir, they've got horses in there, breeding stock. If we don't get them out, we'll get them out. Gideon turned to find Rowena standing on the porch. Stay here. Absolutely not. Rowena, I know horses, Gideon. If they're panicked and trapped, you'll need someone who can calm them enough to lead them out. You know I'm right. He did know, which made it worse. Fine, but you stay outside the barn. You do not go in. Understood? Understood, Rowena lied, and from the look on his face, he knew it. They rode hard, Rowena on Tempest for the first time outside the ranch. The stallion responded beautifully, stretching into a ground-eating gallop that ate up the miles. By the time they reached the Patterson place, smoke was billowing black and thick into the afternoon sky. The scene was chaos. Women and children stood crying at a safe distance. Men ran back and forth with buckets of water that did nothing against flames already consuming half the structure. And from inside came the screaming of terrified horses. South wall's about to go, someone shouted. We got maybe 5 minutes. Gideon was already organizing men, splitting them into teams, some to fight the fire, some to get the horses out. Tom and Miguel headed for the main doors. Rowena dismounted and started toward them. Where the hell do you think you're going? Gideon grabbed her arm. To help. She pulled free. You said 5 minutes. We're wasting time arguing. She was through the doors before he could stop her, Tom and Miguel flanking her. The smoke inside was blinding, the heat immediate and vicious. Rowena pulled her sleeve over her mouth and nose, eyes streaming, trying to see through the hell they'd walked into. 3 horses were trapped in the back stalls, rearing and screaming in terror. Tom tried to approach the first one and nearly got kicked in the head. They're too scared, he shouted over the roar of flames. We'll never get halters on them. We don't need halters. Rowena pushed past him, moving toward the nearest horse. It was a bay mare, whites of her eyes showing, foam at her mouth. Rowena started talking, low and steady, the same voice she'd used with Tempest. Easy, beautiful girl. I know you're afraid. I know, but we're going to walk out of here together. Ma'am, we don't have time. Then stop talking and open the stall door. Miguel yanked the door open. The mare tried to bolt, but Rowena was already there, hands on her neck, voice never stopping. That's it. Come with me. Trust me, just for a moment. Just long enough to survive. Impossibly, the mare calmed. Not completely. She was still trembling, still terrified, but enough to let Rowena lead her. They made it out of the barn just as part of the roof collapsed behind them. 2 more, Tom yelled, already heading back in. The second horse was easier, a young gelding who followed the mare's scent out. But the third was a stallion, bigger than Tempest and just as wild. He'd kicked through part of his stall and was caught, one leg tangled in broken boards, bleeding and insane with pain and fear. We have to leave him, Miguel shouted. The smoke was too thick now, the heat unbearable. No. Rowena moved toward the stallion. Above them, another beam cracked ominously. Rowena! Gideon's voice somewhere behind her. Get out of there now! She ignored him, focused entirely on the trapped horse. Listen to me, she said, kneeling beside the bloody leg. I'm going to free you. It will hurt. You will want to kick me. But if you kick me, we both die. So you're going to trust me instead. The stallion's eyes rolled wildly. Rowena placed both hands on his shoulder, feeling the frantic hammering of his heart. I know, she whispered. I know what it's like to be trapped with no way out. But there is always a way. Always. You just have to be brave enough to take it. She started working the boards loose, splinters driving into her hands, smoke burning her lungs. The stallion trembled, but didn't strike. Above them, more of the roof gave way, sending sparks raining down. Then the leg was free. Blood poured from deep gashes, but the horse could move. Rowena grabbed his mane and pulled herself up, not thinking, just acting on pure instinct. Run, she told him. Run now. The stallion needed no further encouragement. He bolted for the opening, Rowena clinging to his back, and they burst through the doors just as the entire south wall collapsed inward with a sound like the end of the world. They didn't stop running until they were 100 yards away. Only then did the stallion slow, sides heaving, and Rowena slid off onto shaking legs. Her hands were bleeding. Her dress was burned in places. She couldn't stop coughing. Gideon caught her as her legs gave out. Are you insane? He shouted, and she could hear the fear underneath the anger. You could have been killed. But I wasn't. She coughed again, hard enough to hurt. The horse is fine. Miguel's got him. Sam Patterson's fine too. He got out before it got bad. Everyone's fine except you almost weren't. His hands tightened on her shoulders. Don't ever do that again. You hear me? Don't ever. She kissed him, just leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, cutting off the words, the fear, all of it. For a second he froze, shocked. Then his arms came around her and he kissed her back, hard and desperate and alive. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowena saw every ranch hand, every neighbor, everyone who'd come to help, staring at them with varying expressions of shock and amusement. Well, Tom said into the silence, that's one way to shut him up. Miguel started laughing, which set off Maria, and soon half the crowd was grinning. Gideon's face went red, but he didn't let go of Rowena. We should talk about this, he said quietly. Later. Rowena's legs were still trembling. Right now, I need to sit down before I fall down. He helped her to a wagon bed, sat beside her while Maria fussed over her burned hands and someone brought water. The barn was still burning, but the horses were safe. Sam Patterson came over, tears in his eyes, to thank her for saving his breeding stallion. Rowena accepted his gratitude with as much grace as she could muster, though mostly she just felt exhausted. You're crying, Gideon said suddenly. She was. Silent tears cutting tracks through the soot on her face. I thought I was going to die in there. For just a moment, when the roof started coming down, I was certain that was the end. She looked at him, and all I could think was how angry I was that I'd finally found something worth living for, and I was about to lose it. The horse? No, you fool. This. The ranch. You. All of it. She wiped at her face with shaking hands. I told you I was running. I didn't tell you what I was running toward, because I didn't know. But I know now. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Around them, people were starting to pack up. The fire reduced to embers. The crisis passed. Finally, he said, My wife died 5 years ago. Pneumonia. We'd been married 2 years and I thought I'd have forever with her. After she died, I decided I was done. No more risking that kind of pain. I'd run the ranch, take care of business, and that would be enough. Was it? Enough? No. But it was safe. He turned to face her fully. Then you showed up, dressed like you were going to a funeral, demanding to save a horse everyone knew couldn't be saved. And I looked at you and thought, here comes trouble. Here comes everything I've been avoiding. You can still avoid it, Rowena said. If you want. I'll work the horses, stay out of your way. I don't want that. He said it fiercely, with a certainty that left no room for doubt. I want whatever this is, even if it's complicated, even if it scares me. I want it. Rowena felt something crack open in her chest. something that had been locked down for so long she'd forgotten it was there. I'm 62 years old, Gideon. I have no money, no family, no prospects. I'm exactly the worst possible choice you could make. Yeah, well, I've always been better with horses than good decisions. He smiled slightly. Besides, you're wrong about having no prospects. You've got a job, a place to live, and apparently you've got me, if you want me. I want you, she said simply. Though we're both probably making a terrible mistake. Probably. He kissed her again, softer this time, and Rowena let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe second chances were real after all. They rode back to the ranch in the fading light, Rowena on Tempest, Gideon beside her on his gray gelding. The rest of the hands had gone ahead, leaving them alone with the mountains and the big sky and the quiet understanding that something had fundamentally changed between them. So what happens now? Rowena asked. Now you keep working with Tempest. You help me rebuild the horse program, and we figure out the rest as we go. He paused. Unless you've got a better plan. I've never been good at planning. That's how I ended up here. Then we're well matched, Gideon smiled. Two people with no plan, building something out of nothing. It might not work. Might not. But it might. And I'd rather try and fail than spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been. Rowena thought about that as they crested the ridge and saw the ranch spread out below them, lights already glowing in the windows against the gathering dark. It looked like home. It felt like possibility. Gideon, she said, thank you for taking a chance on a foolish old woman with delusions of relevance. You're not old, you're not foolish, and you're about the most relevant person I've met in a long time. He reached over and took her hand. Now let's get you home and have Maria look at those burns properly. She's going to skin me alive for letting you near that fire. You didn't let me. I went on my own. Try explaining that to Maria. See how far it gets you. They rode down the slope together, and behind them the last light faded from the sky, taking the old Rowena with it, the widow, the failure, the woman with no purpose. What rode into the Vale Ranch that night was someone new, someone who had walked through fire and come out changed, someone who was ready, finally, to stop running and start building. Maria's fury was a thing of beauty, expressed entirely in rapid Spanish, while she cleaned and bandaged Rowena's burned hands with a gentleness that contradicted every sharp word. Gideon stood in the doorway, wisely keeping his distance, while Miguel translated the parts that were fit for mixed company. She says you have the sense of a drunk mule, Miguel reported, trying not to grin, and that if you ever run into a burning building again, she will lock you in the cellar herself. Tell her I appreciate her concern, Rowena said, wincing as Maria applied salve to a particularly deep burn. She heard you. She says appreciation means nothing from someone who clearly values horses more than her own life. The horses couldn't save themselves. Maria paused, meeting Rowena's eyes, and something passed between them. Then Maria said something softer, and Miguel's expression changed. What did she say? Rowena asked. Miguel cleared his throat. She says she understands that when you have lost everything, sometimes saving something else is the only way to prove you're still worth the air you breathe. He looked uncomfortable. Maria lost her first 2 children before we came here. She doesn't talk about it much. Maria tied off the bandage with precise movements, then cupped Rowena's face briefly, saying something else in Spanish before leaving the room. Miguel followed, leaving Rowena and Gideon alone in the kitchen. What did she say at the end? Rowena asked. That you're family now, whether you want to be or not. Gideon finally moved into the room, taking the chair Maria had vacated. She doesn't say that lightly. I've never had family, not really, just obligations dressed up as relations. Well, you've got it now. Maria's already planning to feed you until you gain 20 pounds. Miguel thinks you walk on water after what you did today. Tom's still suspicious, but he's coming around, and Billy won't shut up about how you rode that stallion out of the fire like some kind of warrior queen. Rowena looked down at her bandaged hands. They throbbed with every heartbeat, a reminder that she wasn't invincible no matter how much she might pretend otherwise. I was terrified, the entire time. I thought I was going to die, and all I could think was how stupid I'd been, how arrogant to think I could. But you didn't die. You saved 3 horses in Sam Patterson's entire breeding program, and you scared about 10 years off my life in the process. Gideon reached out, carefully taking one of her bandaged hands. You can't keep doing that. Doing what? Throwing yourself into danger like your life doesn't matter. Old habits, Rowena said quietly. For so long, my life didn't matter. I was decorative, useful for appearances. When my husband needed a hostess, I hosted. When he needed respectability, I provided it. But I was never essential, never someone whose absence would actually change anything. You're essential now, to this ranch, to those horses. He paused. To me. The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. Rowena wanted to believe them, but decades of disappointment had taught her to be cautious with hope. Gideon, I need you to understand something. I am not who I was. That woman who ran great houses and threw elegant parties, she's gone. I don't know who I am now. Some days I barely recognize myself. Good, because I'm not who I was either. The man I was before my wife died would never have let you near that stallion, would never have kissed you in front of half the county. We're both figuring out who we are now. Might as well do it together. Before Rowena could respond, boots sounded on the porch, and Tom burst in, hat in hand, looking agitated. Boss, we got a situation. Gideon was on his feet immediately. What kind of situation? The kind with lawyers. 3 men just rode up in a fancy carriage claiming they need to speak with Lady Ashcroft. Said it's urgent. Rowena felt her stomach drop. She stood slowly, steadying herself against the table. Did they give names? One of them said he was from some firm back east, Whitmore and Associates. Mean anything to you? It meant everything. Whitmore and Associates had been her husband's lawyers, the ones who'd overseen the dismantling of her entire life after his death. She'd thought she was done with them. Apparently they weren't done with her. I'll handle this, she said. Like hell, Gideon said. Whatever this is, you're not facing it alone. They found the 3 men standing in the yard, looking profoundly out of place in their city suits and polished shoes. The oldest, a thin man with wire spectacles and a severe expression, stepped forward when he saw Rowena. Lady Ashcroft, we've been searching for you for quite some time. Mr. Whitmore, Rowena kept her voice level. I cannot imagine what business you might have with me. The estate was settled, everything sold. You made quite certain of that. Indeed. However, a complication has arisen. Whitmore gestured to one of his companions, who produced a leather document case. Your late husband's brother, Lord Edmund Ashcroft, has contested the settlement. He claims certain properties were improperly liquidated and that as the heir to the title, he has rights to nothing, Rowena interrupted. Edmund didn't speak to his brother for 15 years. He certainly never offered assistance when we were drowning in debt. Now that the debts are paid and there might be something to gain, suddenly he has concerns? Nevertheless, the matter is before the courts, and there is the question of your signature on certain documents. Lord Edmund suggests they may have been obtained under duress. Gideon moved closer to Rowena's side. You calling this lady a liar? Whitmore's gaze flickered to Gideon, dismissive. I'm calling her a widow who may have been taken advantage of during a vulnerable time. If signatures were forged or coerced, the entire settlement could be invalidated, which means Lady Ashcroft could be held personally responsible for debts she believed were resolved. The world tilted slightly. Rowena had thought the worst was behind her. She'd accepted poverty, accepted exile, accepted starting over with nothing. But the possibility of being dragged back into that legal nightmare, of being held responsible for her dead husband's catastrophic failures. How much? She asked. I beg your pardon? How much does Edmund claim I owe? Whitmore consulted his papers. Approximately £40,000, plus accrued interest. In American currency, that would be— I know what it would be. Rowena's voice came from somewhere far away. And I don't have it. I don't have anything, so you've wasted a trip. Actually, we've come to offer a solution. Lord Edmund is prepared to drop all claims and assume responsibility for the debts himself. In exchange, you would need to return to England, testify that the original settlement was conducted improperly, and sign certain documents transferring any remaining claims to him. Remaining claims to what? There's nothing left. There's the matter of your dower rights. The London property, while sold, generated more than was needed to cover your portion of the debts. The excess, approximately £8,000, should have been held in trust for you. Lord Edmund believes that some should rightfully pass to him as the new Earl. £8,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to live on. Enough to stop running, enough to build something real, and Edmund wanted to take it. "No," Rowena said. "I don't think you understand the gravity. No, I will not return to England. I will not lie and say I was coerced. And I will not give Edmund 1 penny." She straightened her spine, and for a moment she was every inch the noblewoman she'd been born to be. "You may tell Lord Edmund that if he wishes to pursue this matter, he can do so without my cooperation. I suspect when the courts examine the actual facts, that his brother gambled away a fortune while Edmund sat in comfort doing nothing, and that I sold everything I owned to honorably settle those debts. They will not be sympathetic to his claims." Whitmore's expression hardened. "Very well. But understand, Lady Ashcroft, that without your cooperation, this will become extremely unpleasant. Lord Edmund has resources. He can tie you up in courts for years. You'll never escape this debt." "Then I'll never escape it. But I'll do it on my terms, in a place where I matter, surrounded by people who see me as more than a title and a bank account." She gestured toward the road. "Good day, gentlemen. You have a long ride back to town." The lawyers left, their carriage raising dust as they headed toward the main road. Rowena stood watching until they disappeared from view, then her knees buckled. Gideon caught her, guided her to the porch steps. £40,000, she said numbly. "That's over $200,000. I'll never have that kind of money. Never." "Then you don't pay it." Gideon sat beside her. "Let him take you to court. Let him try to collect. He's in England. You're here. What's he going to do? You don't understand how these things work. Edmund has connections, lawyers, money. He can make my life hell for years. And if he wins, if somehow he convinces a court that I owe that money, they could seize anything I have, including wages." She looked at Gideon. "I can't stay here. I can't risk bringing that down on you and the ranch." "The hell you can't." His voice was fierce. "You think I'm going to let some English lord I've never met run you off? After everything you've done here?" "It's not about what you'll let—" "No, listen to me. I've spent the last 5 years playing it safe, building walls, making sure nothing could hurt me again. Then you showed up, and within 2 weeks you've torn through every defense I had. You made me care about something other than this ranch. Made me want something other than just getting through the day." He took her bandaged hands carefully. "I'm not losing that because some bastard across an ocean wants money he doesn't deserve. Gideon, we fight this, together, however long it takes." Rowena wanted to believe him, but she'd learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it real. "You don't know what you're offering. Legal battles like this, they consume everything. Time, money, peace of mind. Eventually you'll resent me for bringing this chaos into your life. Maybe, or maybe I'll surprise you." He smiled slightly. "After all, you surprised me. Seems fair to return the favor." Tom appeared from the barn, reading the tension in their postures. "They gone?" "For now," Gideon said. "Tom, I need you to find me a lawyer. Best one you know." "Boss, not asking. We're going to need legal help, and I want someone who knows their way around property law and debt collection. Someone mean." Tom studied them both, then nodded slowly. "I know a guy in Helena, Casper Stone. Mean as a snake and twice as smart. He mostly does mining claims, but he's handled some nasty inheritance disputes. I'll send word." After Tom left, Rowena sagged against Gideon's shoulder. "I thought I was done with all this. I thought I'd left it behind." "You did. This is Edmund dragging it back. Different thing." Gideon's arm came around her. "And he picked the wrong person to mess with. You walked into a burning building today to save horses. You broke a stallion everyone said couldn't be broken. You really think you can't fight off one greedy lord? It's different. The horses, the fire, those were immediate. This is going to be long, grinding, exhausting. So, we've got time, we've got stubbornness, and we've got about 30 people on this ranch who'd happily throw those lawyers in the creek if they show up again." He tilted her chin up so she met his eyes. "You're not alone in this, Rowena. Stop acting like you are." She kissed him then, soft and desperate, trying to pour into it all the gratitude and fear and hope she couldn't find words for. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I'm terrified of letting you do this," she whispered, "of letting you tie yourself to my mess." "Too late. I'm already tied." He stood, pulling her up with him. Now come on. Maria's probably got dinner ready, and if we're late, she'll have both our hides. The next few weeks fell into a pattern that was almost normal. Rowena worked with Tempest every morning, building on their foundation until the stallion was responding to subtle cues, moving like they were connected by invisible threads. She started working with other horses too, young ones that needed gentle breaking, older ones with bad habits from rough handling. Word spread, and neighboring ranchers started bringing their problem horses to the Vale Ranch, willing to pay for Rowena's particular magic. "You're building a reputation," Gideon said one afternoon, watching her work with a mare that had been labeled unrideable after throwing 3 experienced hands. "I'm simply listening to them. Most horses aren't broken, they're just unheard." Rowena circled the mare, who tracked her movement with wary interest. "This one was beaten. You can see it in how she flinches when you raise your hand. Someone tried to force submission, and she learned to fight instead. Can you fix her?" "I can give her a reason to trust again. Whether she takes it is up to her." By the end of the second week, the mare was following Rowena like a puppy. By the third week, she was saddled and ridden without incident. The rancher who'd brought her stood watching with tears in his eyes. "My daughter," he said roughly. "She loved this horse, but after the mare threw her and she broke her arm, I couldn't risk it. Was going to sell her for meat. Now," he trailed off. "How much do I owe you?" $20, Gideon said before Rowena could answer. She shot him a look but didn't argue. She was terrible at charging for her work, would have done it for free if left to her own devices. But Gideon insisted on fair payment, and slowly, steadily, money started coming in. The lawyer, Casper Stone, arrived in early October. He was exactly as advertised, mean-looking, sharp-eyed, with a voice that could cut glass. He listened to Rowena's story without interruption, reviewed the documents the English lawyers had left, and asked questions that made her relive every awful moment of the estate collapse. "This Edmund," Stone said finally. "He waited 3 years to contest the settlement?" "Apparently." "That's suspicious right there. Most jurisdictions have time limits on this kind of challenge, and his claim that you were coerced, that would have needed to be raised immediately, not years later." Stone made notes in cramped handwriting. "I'll need to research English property law, which is going to be expensive and annoying, but my gut says this is a nuisance suit. He's hoping you'll settle rather than fight." "I can't settle," Rowena said. "I don't have what he wants." "Then we fight. I'll file responses, drag this out, make it as costly and painful for him as possible. Eventually he'll realize you're serious and back off, or he'll push it to trial, in which case we'll destroy his credibility." Stone smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. "I'm very good at destroying credibility." The retainer Stone required was steep, $500 just to start. Gideon paid it without hesitation, waving off Rowena's protests. "Consider it an investment," he said. "You're bringing in good money with the horse training. This'll pay itself off." But Rowena saw the ranch accounts when Gideon wasn't looking. The $500 represented a significant chunk of their operating capital. The ranch was doing better than it had in years, but it wasn't flush. Gideon was betting on her, spending money he couldn't easily replace, and the weight of that trust felt heavier than any debt. She started pushing herself harder, taking on more horses, working longer hours. Tempest remained her morning priority, but afternoons she'd work with 2 or 3 other animals, sometimes not finishing until after dark. Maria scolded her about skipping meals. Tom muttered that she was going to work herself into an early grave. Gideon said nothing, but she caught him watching her with worried eyes. "I'm fine," she told him one evening when he found her in the barn long after sunset, working with a young gelding that spooked at shadows. "You're exhausted. You've lost weight you couldn't afford to lose. And your hands—" He gestured to her palms, which were blistered from rope work despite the bandages. "When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" "I sleep enough." "Rowena, I need to earn this, Gideon. You paid Stone. You're paying for my room, my meals, everything. The least I can do is work hard enough to justify that investment." "You're not an investment. You're—" He stopped, frustrated. "You're killing yourself trying to prove something that doesn't need proving." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one dragging legal trouble into someone else's life." "No, I'm the one who chose to help. There's a difference." He moved closer, catching her shoulders gently. "I didn't do this because I expected you to earn it back. I did it because you matter to me. Because watching some English bastard steal from you makes me angry. Because you deserve better than running scared for the rest of your life." Rowena felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't know how to just accept help. I've spent my whole life being useful or being discarded. I don't know how to be anything in between." "Then learn. Because you're staying here, and I'm not letting you work yourself to death proving you deserve a place you've already earned 10 times over." He pulled her close, and Rowena let herself lean into him, feeling the exhaustion she'd been fighting for weeks finally catch up with her. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "of Edmund winning, of losing this place, of you waking up one day and realizing I'm more trouble than I'm worth. Not possible. You saved my breeding program, brought in more business than I've seen in 5 years, and you kiss like, well." He smiled slightly. "Point is, you're stuck with me, whether you like it or not." "I like it," Rowena said quietly. "That's what terrifies me." They stood there in the barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and horses and leather, and Rowena let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe this could last, that maybe she'd finally found a place where running could stop and living could begin. The first snow came in November, dusting the mountains white and turning the ranch into something from a painting. Rowena had never experienced a Montana winter and wasn't prepared for the cold that cut through her threadbare coat like it wasn't there. Maria took one look at her shivering on the porch and dragged her to town, insisting on buying her proper winter clothes with money Rowena didn't have. "Gideon already gave me the money," Maria said when Rowena protested. "So unless you want to make him sad, you'll let me buy you a decent coat and some boots that don't have holes in them." I can't keep accepting." "Then stop thinking of it as accepting. Think of it as letting people care about you. We're allowed to do that, you know, care about you." Maria picked out a heavy wool coat, lined gloves, and boots that actually fit. "There. Now you won't freeze to death," which would upset all of us, not just Gideon. The coat was warm and sturdy, and the most thoughtful gift Rowena had received in years. She wore it constantly, even inside, sometimes when the temperature dropped below freezing and the wind howled through the valley like a living thing. Tempest hated the snow at first, dancing and snorting at the strange white substance covering his paddock. But Rowena worked with him patiently, and eventually he learned that snow was just another thing that couldn't hurt him. By mid-November, she was riding him through the drifts, the stallion moving with confident power, trusting her completely. "He's ready to work," Tom said one morning, watching them practice. "More than ready. That horse is wasted just doing training drills." "What are you suggesting?" Rowena asked. "Stud work, breeding. We've got 3 mares coming into season, and I'd bet money Tempest would throw incredible foals." Tom paused. "Boss has been talking about rebuilding the breeding program for years. Tempest could be the foundation sire, if you're willing." Rowena looked at the stallion, who stood calmly beside her, breath steaming in the cold air. "He deserves to father the next generation. He's earned that much." The breeding program became Rowena's new focus. She worked with Gideon to select appropriate mares, planned breeding schedules, learned the business side of horse ranching. It was complex, demanding work, and she loved every minute of it. For the first time in her life, she was building something that mattered, something that would outlast her. "You're good at this," Gideon said one evening as they reviewed bloodlines and planned next year's breeding schedule. "The business part, I mean. You've got a head for it. I ran a household with 20 servants and hosted dinners for 50 people on a week's notice. This is simpler." Oh, she made a note about a mare from a neighboring ranch, though considerably more rewarding. "Why's that?" "Because horses don't care about titles or money or whether your bloodline goes back 600 years. They care whether you're kind, consistent, and trustworthy. It's refreshingly honest." Gideon smiled. "You ever regret it? Leaving England? Everything you had there?" Rowena considered the question seriously. "I regret that my husband lied to me. I regret that I spent 40 years being someone I wasn't. But leaving? No. If I'd stayed, I would have died there. Slowly, quietly, respectably. Here," she gestured out the window at the snow-covered ranch. "Here I'm alive, properly alive, for the first time in my life." "Good." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "Because I plan on keeping you alive for a long time yet." The letter from Stone arrived in December, thick and official-looking. Rowena's hand shook as she opened it, certain it would be bad news. But Stone's cramped writing actually carried something close to optimism. Lord Edmund's lawyers had missed several filing deadlines in American courts. The debt he was claiming had questionable legal standing under both English and American law. Most importantly, Stone had found evidence that Edmund had known about the estate's financial troubles years before and had refused to help, which undermined his claim that the settlement was improper. "He's losing," Rowena breathed. "Stone thinks Edmund's losing." Gideon read over her shoulder. "Says here Edmund's lawyers are asking for a settlement conference. That mean what I think it means? It means they want to negotiate, which means they know their case is weak." Rowena felt something like hope unfurl in her chest. "We might actually win this." "Might? Lady, we are going to crush this bastard." Gideon picked her up and spun her around, laughing at her startled yelp. "You hear me? We're going to win, and then you're free. Completely free." She kissed him because she couldn't help it, because the joy bubbling up inside her had to go somewhere, because he looked at her like she'd hung the moon and she was starting to believe maybe she deserved that look. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gideon rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. Rowena's heart stopped. "What?" "Marry me. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few months. I know you've got legal troubles and I've got a struggling ranch and neither of us are exactly prize catches. But I don't care. I want you here permanently. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fight with you about how many horses you're taking on and watch you turn impossible animals into partners. Marry me, Rowena." She should say no. It was too soon, too complicated, too risky. They barely knew each other. She was old, poor, legally entangled in ways that could haunt them for years. Every logical reason screamed that this was a terrible idea. "Yes," she said. Gideon blinked. "Yes?" "Yes, you ridiculous man. I'll marry you. Against all common sense and every lesson I've learned about self-preservation, yes." His smile could have lit the entire valley. "You sure? Because I should probably warn you, I snore. And I'm grumpy before coffee. And sometimes I get so focused on ranch work I forget to eat lunch. And I'm stubborn, opinionated, terrible at accepting help, and I talk to horses like they're people." Rowena cupped his face. "We're going to be a disaster together." "The best kind of disaster." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Rowena felt the last of her defenses crumble. She was in love with this man, this place, this life, and for once, she was going to let herself have it, without questioning whether she deserved it. Maria cried when they told her. Miguel shook Gideon's hand and told Rowena in Spanish that if she ever hurt his boss, he'd hide her body where no one would find it, but he said it with such warmth that she knew it was the highest compliment he could give. Tom just grunted and said, "About time," then walked away looking suspiciously emotional. They married in January in the ranch house with just the family present. Rowena wore a simple blue dress Maria had helped her make, her first new dress in years. Gideon wore his best suit, which had moth holes but was clean. The local minister performed the ceremony while snow fell softly outside, and when Gideon kissed his bride, everyone cheered. Afterward, Maria served a feast that could have fed half the county. People from neighboring ranches showed up, despite the cold, bringing gifts and good wishes and stories about the English lady who'd tamed the black devil and won the rancher's heart. Rowena smiled and accepted their congratulations, and for the first time in her 62 years, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Late that night, alone in the room that was now theirs, Gideon pulled her close and whispered against her hair. "No regrets?" "Only that I didn't find you sooner." Rowena tilted her head to look at him. "But perhaps the timing was perfect. Perhaps I needed to lose everything else to be ready for this." "Or maybe," Gideon said softly, "we both needed to be broken before we could understand how to build something that lasts." Rowena thought about that as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, listening to the wind howl outside and feeling safer than she had in decades. Broken. Yes. They were both broken, but maybe that was the point. Maybe the best things weren't built from perfection, but from pieces that had been shattered and carefully, deliberately, chosen to fit together again. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in white silence, and in his paddock, Tempest stood watching the house, ears forward, waiting for morning when the woman who'd saved him would come out again and together they'd face whatever the new day brought. Spring came late that year, the snow lingering into April, like it had forgotten how to leave. Rowena woke one morning to find Gideon already gone, his side of the bed cold. She dressed quickly and found him in the barn with Tom and Miguel, all three men staring at something in the corner stall with identical expressions of concern. "What's wrong?" she asked, already moving toward them. "The Patterson mare," Tom said. "The one we bred to Tempest in December. She's been in labor for 6 hours and the foal's stuck. Breech, looks like." Rowena's stomach tightened. Breech births were dangerous, often fatal. She pushed into the stall where the mare lay on her side, flanks heaving, eyes rolling white with pain and exhaustion. "How long has she been down?" "Hour, maybe. We've tried to turn the foal, but she won't let us near her." Miguel's face was grim. "If we don't get it out soon, we'll lose them both." "Let me try." Rowena knelt in the straw beside the mare's head, placing her hand on the sweating neck. "Hello, beautiful. I know you're afraid. I know you hurt, but I need you to trust me one more time." The mare's breath came in harsh pants. Rowena kept talking, low and steady, the same voice she'd used with Tempest, with the stallion in the burning barn, with every frightened animal she'd gentled over the past months. Slowly, incredibly, the mare's breathing steadied. Her wild eyes focused on Rowena's face. "That's it. I'm here. I won't leave you." Rowena nodded to Gideon. "Try now. Quickly." Gideon moved to the mare's hindquarters, while Rowena kept her attention fixed forward. The mare tensed when Gideon's hands found the foal's malpositioned legs, but she didn't thrash, didn't try to get up, just kept her eyes on Rowena like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. "Got it," Gideon said through gritted teeth. "One leg free. Now the other, there. Okay, Mama, you're going to need to push now." The mare groaned, a sound that tore at Rowena's heart. But she pushed, and with Gideon guiding, the foal emerged in a rush of fluid and membrane. For one terrible moment, it lay perfectly still. Then it shuddered, coughed, and took its first gasping breath. "It's a colt," Tom said, something like awe in his voice. "Look at him. He's perfect." The foal was small, wet, and spindly-legged, but even in those first moments Rowena could see Tempest in him, the same elegant head, the same powerful shoulders. The mare lifted her head, nickering softly, and began cleaning her baby with long, careful strokes of her tongue. "Well done," Rowena whispered to the mare. "So well done, brave girl." She stayed with them for another hour, making sure both mother and foal were stable, before finally dragging herself out of the stall. Her dress was ruined, covered in blood and birth fluids, but she didn't care. That colt was the first offspring from their breeding program, the first tangible proof that what they were building could actually work. Gideon found her leaning against the barn wall, exhausted and elated. "You saved them both. If we'd kept trying to force it, that mare would have killed herself fighting us." She just needed someone to hold on to, something steady in the chaos. Rowena looked at him. "We're going to need a name for him." "You name him. He wouldn't be here without you." She thought about it, watching through the stall door as the colt struggled to his feet on impossibly long legs, determination in every wobbling step. "Storm. Because he fought his way into the world and won." "Storm it is." Gideon pulled her close despite the mess on her clothes. "You know what this means? If that colt grows up half as good as he looks now, we'll have people lining up to breed to Tempest. This could change everything for the ranch." But changing everything brought its own complications. By May, word had spread about the remarkable colt sired by the black stallion nobody could ride except the English lady. Ranchers started showing up wanting to book breeding slots, willing to pay premium stud fees. Some came from as far as Wyoming and Colorado, bringing mares they claimed were from championship lines. Rowena interviewed each one personally, examining bloodlines, watching how owners treated their horses. She turned away more than she accepted, much to Gideon's initial frustration. "That was a $500 stud fee you just refused," he said after she'd sent away a rancher with a beautiful chestnut mare. "We could use that money." That mare was terrified of her owner. Did you see how she flinched when he raised his hand? "I won't breed Tempest to horses whose foals will be raised in fear." Rowena, we can't save every horse in Montana. No, but we can choose not to profit from their suffering. She met his eyes. I know we need money. I know Stone's bills keep coming and the ranch needs repairs and we're not out of trouble yet. But if we compromise now, what's the point? We might as well have left Tempest to be shot that first day. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, shaking his head. You know you're impossible, right? You married me anyway. Best terrible decision I ever made. He kissed her forehead. Fine. We do it your way. But you're the one explaining to Stone why we're turning away paying customers. Stone, it turned out, understood perfectly. Reputation, he said, when Rowena apologized for their selective breeding policy during his next visit. You're building a reputation for quality and ethics. In the long run, that's worth more than quick money. People will pay premium prices to work with someone they trust. He'd come bearing news about Edmund's case. The settlement conference had resulted in Edmund dropping most of his claims in exchange for Rowena waiving any right to the 8,000 pounds that should have been held in trust for her. It meant she'd never see that money, but it also meant she was free, completely, legally free. He loses. You get nothing, Stone explained. But you also owe nothing. All debts cleared, all claims resolved. You walk away clean. I'll take it, Rowena said without hesitation. You sure? We could fight for that money. I think we'd win. How long would that take? Year, maybe 2, plus appeals? Rowena shook her head. I don't want to spend the next 2 years looking over my shoulder waiting for legal papers. I want to be done with Edmund, done with England, done with all of it. Let him have the money. I have something better. After Stone left, Gideon found her in Tempest's paddock, her forehead pressed against the stallion's neck. You okay? I just gave away 8,000 pounds. That's $40,000. Enough to rebuild the ranch twice over. Enough to secure our future for years. She looked up at him. Am I insane? Probably. But you're also free. You can't put a price on that. Can't we, though? $40,000 seems like a fairly specific price. Rowena. Gideon turned her to face him fully. That money came from a life that nearly destroyed you, from a marriage that made you miserable and a man who lied to you for decades. You really want to build our future on that foundation? When he put it that way, the answer was obvious. No, I want to build it on this, on what we're creating together. Then that's what we do. He kissed her, soft and reassuring. Besides, we don't need Edmund's money. Storm's already worth his weight in gold, and we've got 3 more mares due to foal next month. We're going to be fine. They were more than fine. By summer, the Vale Ranch breeding program had a waiting list. Tempest's foals were developing beautifully. Storm in particular showed signs of being even more exceptional than his sire. Rowena spent her days working with young horses, teaching them the same patience and trust she'd taught Tempest, and her evenings planning bloodlines and reviewing applications with Gideon. But success brought attention, and not all of it welcome. The man who rode up in July wore a badge and carried himself with the kind of authority that made everyone nervous. He introduced himself as Marshal William Hendricks from the territorial government, and he wanted to talk to Lady Rowena Vale about a matter of some delicacy. Ma'am, he said, removing his hat as Rowena approached, I apologize for the intrusion, but I've received a complaint. A Mr. Harold Jessup claims you sold him a dangerous horse that subsequently injured his son. Rowena's blood went cold. Harold Jessup. She remembered him, a loud, aggressive man who'd brought a young mare to her in March. Rowena had refused to work with the horse after watching Jessup hit her with a crop for shying at shadows. I didn't sell Mr. Jessup anything, she said carefully. I refused to take his horse for training. He claims differently. Says you took $50 to gentle the mare, gave her back worse than before, and now his boy's got a broken arm from being thrown. That's a lie. Gideon stepped up beside Rowena. My wife turned Jessup away. I was there. He got angry about it, said some things that aren't worth repeating, and rode off. We haven't seen him since. The marshal consulted his notes. Jessup says he has a signed contract, says he paid in advance, and Lady Mrs. Vale didn't fulfill her obligations. I never signed anything, Rowena said, and I certainly never took his money. Mind if I see your records? They spent the next hour going through Rowena's meticulous training logs, showing the marshal every horse she'd worked with, every fee collected, every contract signed. Harold Jessup's name appeared nowhere. "This doesn't make sense," Hendricks muttered. Jessup was pretty convincing, had documents and everything. "May I see these documents?" Rowena asked. The marshal produced a contract bearing what looked like Rowena's signature at the bottom, promising to train one young bay mare for $50, work to be completed by May 15th. The signature was close. Whoever had forged it had practiced. But Rowena's real signature had a distinctive flourish on the R that this one lacked. "That's not my writing," she said. "Look here, at the R. Mine curves back on itself. This one doesn't." Hendricks studied it, then pulled out his own notes where Rowena had signed a statement earlier. "You're right. Damn. Someone's trying to pull something here." "Harold Jessup is angry that I refused to abuse his horse into submission," Rowena said. "This is revenge. Can you prove it? Can he prove I signed this? Can he prove he paid me? Can he prove anything beyond a forged signature?" Gideon's voice was hard. "Because if not, I'd say you're wasting your time, Marshal." Hendricks sighed. "I'm inclined to agree, but I'll need to follow up with Jessup, verify his story. If he's filed false charges, there will be consequences. In the meantime, Mrs. Vale, I'd suggest you keep detailed records of every interaction with clients. Document everything." After the marshal left, Rowena sank onto the porch steps, shaking. "He could have ruined us. If we hadn't kept those records, if we couldn't prove he was lying. But we did prove it. And now Jessup's the one in trouble." Gideon sat beside her. "Though the marshal's right, we need to be more careful. Document everything, maybe even require witnesses for contracts. This is my fault. I embarrassed Jessup by refusing him in front of other ranchers. I should have been more diplomatic." "The hell you should have. You stood up for that mare because she needed someone to. I'm not sorry you did it, and you shouldn't be either." But the encounter left Rowena rattled. She started second-guessing her decisions, wondering if she was being too harsh in her standards, if she should be more accommodating to difficult clients. When a rancher showed up with a young stallion, he wanted trained using traditional methods, breaking him hard and fast. Rowena hesitated. "I could do it," she told Gideon that night. "Just this once. The money would help, and it's not like every horse needs my method." "You don't believe that?" "No, but I'm tired of fighting. Tired of making enemies. Maybe I should just..." "Just what? Compromise everything you believe in because one bastard tried to cause trouble?" Gideon took her hands. "Rowena, you've built something remarkable here. People bring you horses other trainers have given up on. They pay premium prices because they know you'll treat their animals right. You really want to throw that away?" "I want to stop being afraid. Every time someone rides up now, I wonder if they're going to accuse me of something, if they're going to try to destroy what we've built. So we protect ourselves. We keep better records. We require witnesses and deposits and signed statements. But we don't compromise who you are. Because who you are is the whole reason this works." Rowena looked at him, this man who'd taken a chance on a desperate stranger and somehow built a life with her. "When did you get so wise?" "About the time I married a stubborn English lady who taught me that the hard way is usually the right way." She laughed despite herself, feeling some of the tension ease. "I'm not giving up my standards." "Good. Now come to bed. Tomorrow Storm's getting his first saddle introduction, and you'll want to be rested for that." Storm's training became Rowena's focus over the next months. The colt had grown into a magnificent yearling, all power and grace, with his sire's intelligence and his dam's sweet temperament. Rowena took her time with him, building trust before ever introducing tack, and by late fall, Storm was wearing a saddle and bridle like he'd been born to it. "He's going to be something special," Tom said, watching Storm trot circles around Rowena in the training ring. "Better than Tempest, even. I never thought I'd say that." "Different than Tempest," Rowena corrected. "Storm never knew fear the way his father did. He was born into safety. That changes everything." News of Storm spread fast. By October, Rowena had ranchers offering absurd amounts of money to buy him. She refused every offer, no matter how tempting. Storm wasn't for sale. He was the future of their program, proof that what they were doing wasn't just rehabilitation, but creation, building something new from broken pieces. The territorial fair in November brought buyers from 3 states. Gideon entered Storm in the yearling exhibition class over Rowena's protests that he was too young, the competition too intense. But Storm performed beautifully, moving with a precision and grace that left the judges speechless. He took first place, and suddenly, the Vale Ranch breeding program went from respected to legendary. "We've got 23 breeding requests for next season," Gideon said, reviewing the stack of applications that had arrived in the days after the fair. "At $300 per breeding, that's $6,900, Rowena finished, before expenses. Before expenses. Which means after expenses, we're looking at maybe $5,000 clear profit. From one horse." Gideon set down the papers, looking almost stunned. "Do you understand what this means? We could rebuild the entire barn, replace the old equipment, pay off the mortgage, actually save money for once." Rowena felt dizzy. $5,000. More money than she'd seen in 3 years. Enough to secure their future, to stop worrying about every expense, to breathe. "We need to be careful," she said. "We can't overbook Tempest. Too many breedings in one season and the quality suffers. Plus, he's not getting younger. He's 7. That's prime for a stallion. It's also when injuries happen if you push too hard. I won't risk him." Rowena started sorting applications. 23 requests. We take 12. The best mares, the best bloodlines, the owners who'll treat their foals right. "Rowena, we're turning away $3,300. We're protecting our foundation, sire, and maintaining our reputation. Which one matters more?" Gideon studied her for a long moment, then smiled. "You know, when you first showed up here, I thought you were just stubborn. Turns out you're stubborn and smart. Dangerous combination. You love it." "Yeah, I really do." They spent that evening going through applications together, weighing bloodlines against temperament, ownership history against facilities. By midnight, they'd selected their 12, a mix of proven mares and promising young stock that would give them the best chance of producing exceptional foals. "This is actually happening," Rowena said softly, looking at the names on their list. "We're actually building something that works." "We built it already. Now we're just making it bigger." Gideon pulled her close. "And we're doing it right. Your way. Even when it's harder." December brought a cold snap that froze the water trough solid and turned the ranch into a landscape of ice and bitter wind. Rowena spent hours each day breaking ice, checking on horses, making sure everyone had enough feed to generate body heat. Maria scolded her constantly about staying outside too long, but Rowena couldn't help it. These horses were her responsibility, her family in a way that transcended simple ownership. She was in the barn late one night checking on a mare close to foaling when she heard voices outside. Not ranch hands, they'd all turned in hours ago. These voices were unfamiliar, harsh with drink and malice. "This is the place. English bitch thinks she's better than everyone else." Rowena's blood turned to ice. She moved quietly toward the barn door, trying to see without being seen. 3 men on horseback, silhouetted against the moonlight. One of them dismounted, carrying something that sloshed. The sharp smell of kerosene cut through the cold air. They were going to burn the barn. Rowena didn't think. She grabbed a pitchfork from the wall and stepped out into the yard. "You'll stop right there." All 3 men turned. The one with the kerosene can laughed. "Well, look at that. Lady herself. We were hoping we'd see you. Put down the kerosene and get off this property." "Or what? You gonna gentle us like you do them horses?" Another laugh, cruel and mocking. "Harold Jessup sends his regards. Says you cost him a lot of trouble with that marshal. Figured it's time you learned some respect." "Harold Jessup is a coward who beats horses and sends other men to do his fighting." Rowena kept the pitchfork steady despite her shaking hands. "I suppose you're his cousins. The resemblance is unmistakable." The men's expressions darkened. The one with the kerosene took a step forward. "You got a mouth on you, old woman. Someone should teach you." The rifle shot cracked through the night, kicking up dirt 2 feet in front of the men's boots. They froze. Rowena looked back to see Gideon on the porch, rifle to his shoulder, expression colder than the winter air. "Next one goes through flesh," he said calmly. "Your choice whose?" Behind him, Tom and Miguel emerged, both armed. Maria appeared in the doorway with a shotgun that looked older than the ranch itself. Within seconds, every ranch hand was awake and armed, creating a semicircle of very angry people who'd just been woken up by men threatening to burn down their home. The man with the kerosene set it down slowly, hands raised. "We weren't going to do nothing. Just a joke." Funny joke, Tom said. Riding onto private property with accelerant. Sure seems like arson to me. What do you think, boss? I think, Gideon said, not lowering the rifle, that you boys are going to get on your horses and ride back to wherever you came from. And you're going to tell Harold Jessup that if anyone from his family sets foot on Vale Ranch again, they'll be leaving in a pine box. We clear? The men scrambled for their horses. Within a minute they were gone, hoofbeats fading into the distance. Only then did Gideon lower the rifle and come down the steps, pulling Rowena into his arms with a fierceness that took her breath away. You could have been killed, he said roughly. You should have gotten me instead of facing them alone. There wasn't time. They were going to burn the barn. The horses are not worth your life. Nothing is worth your life. He pulled back to look at her. You hear me? Next time something like this happens, you run. You get help. You don't stand there with a pitchfork facing 3 armed men. I couldn't just let them. Yes, you could. That's what insurance is for. That's what rebuilding is for. But you... His voice cracked. There's no rebuilding you if something happens. There's no insurance that brings you back. So you run. Promise me. Rowena looked into his frightened eyes and realized he was right. She'd been so focused on protecting what they'd built that she'd forgotten she was part of what mattered. I promise. Tom cleared his throat. We should report this. Get the marshal out here. In the morning, Gideon said. Tonight, we post guards. 2-hour shifts, nobody alone. If Jessup's boys come back, I want plenty of witnesses to what happens next. They didn't come back that night, or any night after, but the next morning Gideon and Tom rode into town and filed formal charges. The marshal, still embarrassed about the forged contract incident, took the threat seriously. Within a week, all 3 men were arrested. Harold Jessup himself was brought in for questioning, and though nothing could be proven directly, the marshal made it clear that any further incidents would result in serious consequences. It's not over, Stone said when Gideon wrote to him about the situation. Men like Jessup hold grudges. He'll try something else, something harder to prove. You need to be ready. But weeks passed, then months, and nothing happened. Winter deepened into the kind of cold that made breathing hurt, then slowly eased into the first tentative signs of spring. The mares they'd selected for breeding started arriving in March, and Rowena threw herself into the work with renewed purpose. Each breeding was carefully planned, carefully executed. Tempest performed beautifully, gentle with the mares despite his size and power. By April, 11 of the 12 mares had been successfully bred. The 12th, a nervous gray mare from Colorado, refused to stand for the stallion no matter what they tried. Maybe it's not meant to be, the owner said after 3 days of failed attempts. She's too frightened. Rowena looked at the trembling mare, saw the whites of her eyes, the way she flinched from touch. Someone hurt her, badly. That's not fear of breeding, that's fear of everything. So what do? We give her time. If you're willing to leave her here for a few weeks, I can work with her. Help her remember that not all touch is pain. The owner agreed, and Rowena started the slow work of rebuilding trust. It took 3 weeks of patient handling before the mare would let Rowena touch her without flinching. Another week before she'd accept a saddle. By the time breeding season was ending, the mare was transformed, calmer, steadier, willing to trust. She stood quietly for Tempest, and the breeding went smoothly. You've got a gift, the owner said when he came to collect his mare in June. I've had trainers work with her for years, and nobody could get through. You did it in a month. She just needed to know she was safe. That's all any of us need, really. The owner paid their fee and added a substantial bonus. As he rode away, Rowena felt Gideon's arm come around her shoulders. 12 for 12, he said. Every mare bred successfully. You know what the odds of that are. Better when you take your time and do it right. You're going to put us out of business with this quality over quantity approach. She smiled. Somehow I doubt that. She was right. By the time foaling season came around the following spring, the Vale Ranch had more breeding requests than they could possibly accept. Storm, now a 2-year-old of breathtaking beauty and capability, was drawing his own attention as a future breeding prospect. And Tempest had become legendary. The black stallion nobody could ride except one elderly English lady who'd seen something in him everyone else had missed. Standing in the foaling barn in the gray light of dawn, watching a new generation of foals struggle to their feet on wobbly legs, Rowena felt something she'd never quite experienced before. Not happiness, that was too simple. Not contentment, that was too passive. This was something deeper, fiercer. It was purpose. It was meaning. It was the bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. "You're smiling," Gideon said, finding her there among the straw and new life. "I'm happy," Rowena replied simply. "For the first time in my life, I'm actually happy." He kissed her there in the barn with the smell of horses and hay and spring all around them, and Rowena kissed him back with the confidence of someone who'd finally stopped running and learned to stand still long enough to let joy catch up. The happiness lasted exactly 3 weeks before reality came knocking in the form of a telegram from Stone. Harold Jessup had filed a civil suit claiming defamation, loss of business, and emotional distress stemming from the criminal charges that had been filed against his cousins. He was seeking $20,000 in damages. "He can't be serious," Rowena said, staring at the yellow paper like it might burst into flames. "The marshal arrested those men because they tried to burn down our barn. There's nothing defamatory about reporting a crime." "Doesn't matter if it's serious," Gideon said grimly. "What matters is it'll cost us money to defend," which is exactly what he wants. "Bleed us dry with legal fees until we can't afford to fight anymore." "How much will this cost?" "Stone says at least $2,000 just to mount a defense. Maybe more if it goes to trial." $2,000. The breeding program was profitable now, but that kind of money would wipe out most of their savings. Rowena felt the old familiar fear creeping back in, the sense that no matter how far she ran or how hard she worked, the past would always find a way to drag her back down. "We fight," she said, though her voice shook. "We've come too far to let Harold Jessup destroy what we've built." But fighting proved harder than either of them anticipated. Jessup had money, connections, and a willingness to lie that would have been impressive if it weren't so destructive. He claimed the Vale Ranch had spread rumors about his horse training methods, costing him clients. He produced witnesses who swore they'd heard Rowena call him cruel and incompetent in public. None of it was true, but proving that required time, money, and energy they didn't have to spare. The case dragged through summer into fall. Stone was brilliant, methodical, slowly dismantling Jessup's claims one by one. But every victory came with a bill. $500. $700. $1,000. The numbers mounted like winter snow, and Rowena watched their savings dwindle with a sick feeling in her stomach. "We should settle," she told Gideon one night in September. They were in his office, reviewing yet another invoice from Stone, and Rowena couldn't take it anymore. "Offer him $5,000 to drop it. It's less than we'll spend fighting. It's also admitting we did something wrong, which we didn't." "I don't care about admitting anything. I care about keeping this ranch afloat." Gideon set down the invoice, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You remember what you told me when Edmund wanted you to settle? You said you'd rather fight and lose than surrender to someone who didn't deserve to win. That was different." "How?" "That was just me. This affects you, the ranch, everyone who works here. I can't be selfish about this. It's not selfish to stand up for yourself. It's not selfish to refuse to let bullies win." Gideon took her hands. "Besides, Stone thinks we're close. 1 more month, and he'll have enough to get this thrown out completely." 1 more month meant at least another $1,000. Rowena wanted to believe it would be worth it, but the fear was winning. She'd spent too many years watching everything fall apart, learning that hope was just another word for eventual disappointment. "I'm tired," she admitted. "I'm tired of fighting, tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of waiting for the next disaster." "I know, but you don't get to quit. Not on me, not on this ranch, and definitely not on yourself." He pulled her close. "We're going to win this. And when we do, Harold Jessup is going to regret the day he decided to mess with us." Gideon's confidence was absolute, but Rowena's faith was wearing thin. She threw herself into work to avoid thinking about the lawsuit, taking on more training clients than was wise, pushing herself until Maria threatened to lock her in her room if she didn't slow down. But staying busy was the only thing that kept the panic at bay. Storm's training became her refuge. The young stallion was approaching 3 years old now, ready to start serious work. Rowena began teaching him advanced maneuvers, the kind of precise control that would make him valuable not just as a breeding prospect, but as a working ranch horse. Storm learned fast, eager to please, and working with him reminded Rowena why she'd started this whole venture in the first place. "You're good with him," a voice said one afternoon. Rowena turned to find a woman leaning against the corral fence, watching with obvious appreciation. She was maybe 50, dressed practically, but expensively, with the kind of weathered competence that spoke of years in the saddle. "Thank you," Rowena said. "Are you looking for training services?" "Actually, I'm looking for you. Rowena Vale, right? The one who broke the black stallion everyone said was impossible?" "I didn't break him. I gentled him. There's a difference." The woman smiled. "That's exactly what I'd heard. I'm Catherine Morrison. I run the Morrison Ranch about 60 miles north of here. Biggest horse operation in Montana, and we're looking to upgrade our breeding program." She gestured to Storm. "That's Tempest's son?" "Yes, Storm, 2 years old. He's magnificent. Your breeding, your training. My husband and I planned the breeding. The training is mine." Catherine studied Storm with the eye of someone who knew horseflesh inside and out. "I'd like to make you an offer, a partnership. Morrison Ranch has the facilities, the capital, the distribution network. You have the expertise and the bloodlines. Together we could build something that would dominate the Western horse market for the next generation." Rowena's heart started pounding. A partnership with Morrison Ranch would mean security, resources, an end to the constant financial pressure. "What kind of partnership are you proposing?" 50-50 ownership of a new breeding program. You bring Tempest and Storm, provide training oversight and breeding decisions. We provide facilities, staff, capital investment, and handle sales and marketing. Profits split evenly down the middle. "And the Vale Ranch?" "Remains yours completely. This would be a separate entity. Think of it as expanding rather than selling." Catherine pulled out a leather portfolio. "I've drawn up preliminary terms. Look them over, discuss with your husband. If you're interested, my lawyers can have formal contracts ready within a week." After Catherine left, Rowena stood in the corral holding the portfolio like it might explode. This was the answer to everything, the lawsuit, the financial pressure, all of it. With Morrison Ranch backing them, they could fight Jessup forever if necessary. They could expand the breeding program, hire more staff, finally stop struggling. So why did it feel like a trap? Gideon found her an hour later, still standing there, portfolio unopened. "What's wrong?" She told him about Catherine's offer. As she spoke, she watched his expression shift from surprise to excitement to something more complicated. "That's incredible," he said. "Morrison Ranch is the biggest operation in 3 states. A partnership with them would set us up for life." "Yes." "But you're not excited about it." Rowena finally opened the portfolio, skimming the terms. They were generous. Fair even. 50-50 split. Creative control for her. Protections written in for both sides. Catherine Morrison was clearly serious and willing to put real money behind the venture. "I spent 40 years being part of something that looked impressive from the outside," Rowena said slowly. "A grand estate, a titled husband, everything society said I should want. And every day of it felt like slowly suffocating. This ranch, what we've built here, it's small, it's struggling, it's imperfect. But it's ours. Completely ours. A partnership wouldn't change that. Wouldn't it? The moment we tie ourselves to Morrison Ranch, we're accountable to them. Their priorities become our priorities. Their timeline becomes our timeline." She met his eyes. "I didn't escape one cage just to walk into another, even if this one is gilded." Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. "You know what I love about you? You're possibly the most stubborn, impractical woman I've ever met, and you're absolutely right. You don't think we should take the offer?" "I think we should do what we've been doing. Build it ourselves, our way, on our terms. Even if it's harder, even if it takes longer. Because when we succeed, and we will succeed, it'll be ours, really, truly ours." Rowena felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she hadn't realized was there. "We might be making a terrible mistake." "Probably, but we'll make it together." They sent Catherine Morrison a polite refusal, thanking her for the offer but explaining they preferred to remain independent. Catherine took it gracefully, saying the door would remain open if they changed their minds. But Rowena knew they wouldn't. They'd chosen the harder path, and having made that choice, there was no going back. Stone's promised breakthrough came in October, when he uncovered evidence that two of Jessup's witnesses had been paid for their testimony. It wasn't much, $50 each, but it was enough to destroy their credibility. When confronted, both men recanted, admitting Jessup had told them what to say. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice, meaning Jessup couldn't refile, and ordered him to pay the Vail Ranch's legal fees. The victory should have felt triumphant. Instead, Rowena mostly felt exhausted. They'd won, but the fight had cost them nearly $3,000, even with the reimbursement, months of stress, and something less tangible but equally important, the sense of safety they'd been building. "It's over," Gideon said when Stone's final letter arrived confirming the dismissal and fee award. "Jessup can't touch us now. Until the next one, the next angry client, the next person who decides we're a threat." Rowena sank into a chair. "This will never really be over, will it?" "Maybe not. Success makes enemies. Always has." He knelt beside her chair. "But it also makes allies. Every client whose horse we've helped, every rancher we've dealt with fairly, every person who's seen what we're building here, they're on our side. And there's a lot more of them than there are Harold Jessups." He was right, Rowena discovered over the following months. When word spread about Jessup's fraud and the dismissed lawsuit, support poured in from unexpected places. Ranchers who'd been fence-sitting about using their breeding program suddenly signed contracts. Training clients who'd been considering other options chose the Vail Ranch specifically because of how they'd handled the legal fight. Even the territorial government took notice, with officials visiting to discuss partnering on a horse improvement program for the cavalry. By the spring of Storm's third year, the ranch was thriving in a way that went beyond simple financial success. They'd built a reputation not just for quality horses, but for integrity, fairness, and the kind of quiet excellence that couldn't be bought or faked. Rowena's training methods were being studied and copied by operations across the West. Tempest's bloodline was becoming legendary, and Storm was developing into everything they'd hoped: powerful, intelligent, and gentle enough that even inexperienced riders could handle him. "He's ready," Tom said one morning, watching Storm work through a complex series of maneuvers with barely perceptible cues from Rowena. "More than ready. We should enter him in the territorial championships." The championships were the biggest horse competition in Montana, drawing competitors from 6 states and territories. Winning would cement Storm's reputation and, by extension, the entire Vail Ranch breeding program. But it also meant exposing him to scrutiny, criticism, and the possibility of very public failure. "What do you think?" Gideon asked Rowena later. She thought about Storm, about how far he'd come from that fragile newborn struggling to his feet in the folding barn, about how he'd never known fear or cruelty, had never learned to expect pain from human hands. He was the living proof that you could build something beautiful from a foundation of trust and patience. "We enter him," she said, "not to prove anything to anyone else, but to show what's possible when you do things right." The championships were held in Helena in June, a week-long spectacle of horsemanship, breeding exhibitions, and competitions across a dozen categories. Storm was entered in the 3-year-old working stallion division, competing against horses from established programs that had been producing champions for generations. The Vail Ranch contingent made the trip in force: Gideon, Rowena, Tom, Miguel, Maria, and half the ranch hands. They set up camp on the fairgrounds, groomed Storm until he gleamed like polished ebony, and tried not to let their nerves show. The preliminaries went smoothly. Storm performed beautifully, responding to Rowena's cues with precision and grace. They advanced to the semifinals, then the finals, and suddenly they were one of 3 horses competing for the championship. "You're shaking," Gideon observed as they waited for the final round to begin. "I'm terrified," Rowena admitted. "What if he spooks? What if I make a mistake? What if you stop borrowing trouble and just trust him? Trust yourself." Gideon kissed her forehead. "You've got this, both of you." The final round required each horse to perform a series of complex maneuvers: tight turns, rapid transitions between gaits, backing up while maintaining straightness, standing perfectly still despite distractions. The first competitor, a bay gelding from Wyoming, performed competently but knocked over a cone during the backing exercise. The second, a gray mare from Colorado, refused the final standing test when someone in the crowd sneezed. Then it was Storm's turn. Rowena mounted him in the warm-up area, taking a moment to center herself. Storm's ears were forward, attentive but relaxed. She could feel his heartbeat through the saddle, steady and strong. Whatever happened in the next 10 minutes, they'd face it together. They entered the arena to polite applause. Storm's black coat gleamed in the afternoon sun, every muscle defined, every movement economical. Rowena asked him to walk, and he walked. Trot, and he transitioned smoothly. Canter, and he moved like water flowing uphill, defying gravity through sheer grace. The tight turns were perfect, the rapid transitions flawless. When she asked him to back up, he moved straight as an arrow for 20 feet. And when the final test came, standing absolutely still while the judges walked around him, clapped their hands, waved flags, Storm didn't even flinch. He stood like a statue, trusting Rowena completely, proof that fear wasn't inevitable when trust was absolute. The crowd erupted when they finished. Rowena dismounted on shaking legs, pressing her face against Storm's neck while he nuzzled her shoulder, completely unbothered by the noise and celebration around them. The judges' decision was unanimous. Storm took first place by the widest margin in championship history. Standing in the winner's circle with the ribbon in her hand and Storm beside her, Rowena felt tears streaming down her face. Not tears of happiness, exactly, though she was happy, but something deeper. Relief, maybe. Vindication. Proof that the impossible thing she'd attempted 3 years ago in a dusty Montana corral hadn't been foolish or naive, but visionary. "You did it," Gideon said, pulling her close despite the crowd of onlookers. "You really did it." "We did it," Rowena corrected. "All of us. Every person who believed this could work." The celebration that night was raucous and long. Maria insisted on cooking for everyone despite the limited camp kitchen facilities. Tom got drunk and told anyone who'd listen about the day the English lady had climbed onto a killer horse and proved everyone wrong. Miguel made a toast in Spanish that had Maria crying and swatting at him simultaneously. And Gideon stood with his arm around Rowena, watching their family celebrate, looking more content than she'd ever seen him. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I'm the luckiest man alive. That I almost shot the horse that started all this. That you're the most remarkable person I've ever met. And I still can't quite believe you chose me." "I didn't choose you. I chose survival. You just happened to be part of the package." She smiled. "Though I suppose I've grown somewhat fond of you in the interim." "Somewhat fond. That's romantic." "I'm 64 years old, Gideon. Romance at my age means not having to break ice on the water basin in the morning. Everything else is extra." He laughed, and the sound of it wrapped around Rowena like a warm blanket. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Not romance or passion or any of the things she'd been taught to value. Just this: partnership, purpose. The bone-deep satisfaction of building something meaningful with someone who saw her as she actually was and loved her anyway. The offers started arriving within days of Storm's championship win. Breeding requests, training contracts, even an inquiry from the Army about developing horses for cavalry use. The volume was overwhelming, the potential income staggering. Rowena and Gideon spent a week just sorting through proposals, trying to figure out which opportunities aligned with their values and which would require too much compromise. "We could expand," Gideon said, reviewing a particularly generous breeding contract. "Build a second barn, hire more trainers, take on twice the work. Or we could stay the size we are and just be more selective. Quality over quantity, remember?" "I remember. I'm just saying, we've got options now, real ones." They chose a middle path, accepting the contracts that fit their program and philosophy, while declining the ones that would have required compromising their methods. They hired 2 additional trainers, both young, both eager to learn Rowena's patient, trust-based approach. They built a new foaling barn with proper facilities for difficult births, and they raised their stud fees, not out of greed, but because their time and Tempest genetics were genuinely worth more than they'd been charging. By the following spring, the Vale Ranch breeding program was operating at capacity with a 2-year waiting list. Tempest foals were commanding premium prices sight unseen. Storm had begun his own breeding career, showing every sign of matching or exceeding his sire's reputation. And Rowena had become something she'd never imagined being, a respected expert, someone other trainers sought out for advice, someone whose opinion carried weight. "You're famous," Maria said one morning, showing Rowena a newspaper article about innovative horse training methods in the Western Territories. Rowena's name featured prominently, along with a sketch of her working with Storm that made her look far more dignified than she felt. I'm notorious, perhaps. Not quite the same thing. You're changing how people think about horses, about training. That's more than famous. That's important. Important. The words settled on Rowena like snow on a mountainside, light but undeniable. She'd spent most of her life being decorative, useful only in the most superficial ways. Now she was important. Her work mattered. Her methods were being copied across 3 territories. She mattered. Tempest's 10th birthday arrived in July, marked with ceremony by the entire ranch. 10 years since Gideon had bought him off a desperate Wyoming rancher. 3 years since Rowena had insisted he could be saved. The Black Stallion had sired 43 foals in that time, every one of them sound, many of them champions in their own right. He'd earned his keep 100 times over and shown no signs of slowing down. Think you'll make it to 20? Tom asked, watching Tempest graze peacefully in the afternoon sun. If we're lucky, Rowena said. Though we should probably start planning for succession. Storm can handle some of the breeding load, but we'll want another stallion coming up behind him. Already ahead of you. Gideon appeared with a young colt on a lead rope, maybe 6 months old, all legs and curiosity. This is Thunder, Storm's son, out of that nervous gray mare you worked with. Owners willing to sell him to us if we want him. Rowena studied the colt. He had Storm's elegant head and Tempest's powerful build, plus something of his dam's delicate intelligence. How much? 2,000. It was steep but not unreasonable for a grandson of Tempest with Storm's bloodline. We'll take him. Start him young, gentle him right, and by the time Tempest retires, we'll have 3 generations working. The dynasty was building itself, piece by piece, foal by foal. It was the kind of legacy that outlasted individual lives, that would carry forward long after Rowena and Gideon were gone. The thought should have been melancholy, but instead it felt like hope. They were building something permanent in an impermanent world, creating beauty that would survive them. The letter from England arrived in September, forwarded through 3 addresses before finally finding its way to Montana. It was from a solicitor Rowena had never heard of, informing her that Lord Edmund Ashcroft had died of apoplexy and his estate was being settled. As the widow of the previous earl, she was entitled to certain ceremonial acknowledgments and the opportunity to contest the will if she felt she'd been improperly excluded. You going to contest it? Gideon asked. Rowena stared at the letter for a long moment, then walked to the stove and fed it to the fire. No, Edmund can keep his estate, his title, and his miserable legacy. I have everything I need right here. You sure? There might be money. I don't want his money. I don't want anything that connects me to that life anymore. She turned to face him. I'm Rowena Vale now, not Lady Ashcroft, not anyone's widow except eventually yours, and I'm perfectly happy with that. Gideon pulled her close. Eventually? You planning on going somewhere? Not if I can help it, though statistics suggest one of us will outlive the other, and given your appalling coffee consumption and tendency to skip meals when you're focused on work, I'm betting it'll be me. Then I'd better make the most of the time I've got. He kissed her there in the kitchen, with the smell of Maria's bread baking and the sound of horses whinnying in the yard and all the chaotic imperfection of their real earned life surrounding them. And Rowena kissed him back with the fierce gratitude of someone who'd lost everything and found something better in the ruins. 5 years after Rowena first rode Tempest in that dusty corral, the Vale Ranch celebrated its 25th anniversary under Gideon's ownership. The celebration was massive. Neighbors from 100 miles around, clients from 6 states, even Catherine Morrison from Morrison Ranch, who'd remained friendly despite the rejected partnership. They roasted a whole steer, served enough food to feed an army, and drank enough whiskey to float a riverboat. Tom gave a rambling speech about watching the ranch transform from a struggling operation to the finest breeding program in the West. Miguel told stories about the early days when they weren't sure they'd make it through each winter. Maria cried and fed everyone extra dessert. And Gideon stood with Rowena on the porch, watching their people celebrate, looking more at peace than the bitter, isolated man she'd met that first blazing afternoon. Any regrets? He asked. About turning down Morrison Ranch? About refusing Edmund's settlement? About climbing on a wild horse when any sensible person would have walked away? Rowena considered, No, not a single one. You? Just that I wasted 5 years hiding from life before you showed up and dragged me back into it. I didn't drag, I merely suggested an alternative perspective. You called me a coward for wanting to shoot that horse. I did no such thing. I simply indicated that the horse deserved a chance, and you were being unnecessarily hasty in your judgment. That's fancy talk for calling me a coward. Rowena smiled. Perhaps, but you proved me wrong by giving us the opportunity. That takes more courage than most people have. They stood together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple and rose. The ranch spread out below them, prosperous and productive, built on trust and patience and the stubborn insistence that broken things could be made whole if you cared enough to try. Tempest died peacefully in his sleep 3 winters later, at the age of 13. They found him in the morning, lying in his favorite corner of the paddock, looking more at rest than he ever had in life. Rowena wept over him, this horse that had changed everything, that had seen something in her worth saving just as she'd seen it in him. He had a good life, Gideon said gently. Because of you, he had a good life. We gave each other good lives, Rowena corrected. He saved me as much as I saved him. They buried Tempest on a hill overlooking the ranch, marked with a simple stone that read, Tempest, Foundation Sire, proof that trust can heal anything. And if Rowena visited the grave more often than was strictly rational, if she sometimes talked to the stone like the stallion could still hear her, no one mentioned it. Storm stepped into his sire's role seamlessly, kind and patient with mares, producing foals that combined beauty with tractability. Thunder was developing beautifully, already showing signs he'd be worthy of his grandfather's legacy. The dynasty continued, generation after generation, each one building on the foundation Tempest and Rowena had established together. Rowena turned 70, then 75, her silver hair going white, her movements slowing, but her mind as sharp as ever. She still worked with difficult horses, though she let the younger trainers handle the more physically demanding cases. Gideon aged beside her, his hair thinning, his face weathering like the mountains that surrounded them, but his eyes still lighting up when he looked at her like she was the most remarkable thing he'd ever seen. We did it, she said one evening as they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. We actually built something that lasted. You doubted? Every single day for the first 5 years, less frequently after that, but the doubt never completely went away. And now? Rowena looked out at the ranch, at the horses grazing peacefully, at the barns they'd built and maintained, at the people who'd become family. Now, I think perhaps doubt is fine as long as you keep working anyway. The certainty isn't what matters. The trying is. Gideon took her hand, his fingers rough with decades of ranch work, fitting perfectly against hers. I love you, you know. Never got tired of saying it even after all these years. I love you too. Though after 20 years of marriage, I should hope that's established by now. Just making sure. In case you'd forgotten. I forget where I put my reading glasses. I forget whether I fed the chickens. But I never forget why I stayed. She squeezed his hand. You gave me a reason to stop running. That's not something a person forgets. They sat together as darkness fell and the stars emerged one by one, countless points of light in the vast Montana sky. Inside the house, Maria was cooking dinner, the smell of her green chili drifting through the open windows. In the barn, young trainers were settling horses for the night, using the methods Rowena had taught them, passing forward the knowledge that trust was stronger than force. And on the hill overlooking everything, Tempest Stone stood silent witness to the impossible thing they'd accomplished together. Rowena died on a bright spring morning in her 78th year, quietly in her sleep, Gideon's hand in hers. She'd spent the previous day working with a young filly that everyone else had labeled untrainable, and she'd done it successfully, one last proof that her methods worked, that patience and understanding could reach even the most frightened hearts. They buried her beside Tempest on the hill, with a stone that read, Rowena Vale. She saw worth where others saw failure. She built beauty from broken pieces. She mattered. And if the entire territory turned out for the funeral, if ranchers came from 6 states to pay their respects, if hardened cowboys wept openly at the loss of the English lady who taught them that gentleness was strength, it was only because she'd earned every bit of it. The ranch continued, as Rowena would have wanted. Gideon ran it for another 5 years before age, and grief finally slowed him down enough that he handed control to Miguel's son, a young man who'd learned horse training at Rowena's knee. Storm sired champions for another decade. Thunder after him. The dynasty rolled forward, generation after generation, each one carrying forward the lessons learned from a black stallion and an aging noblewoman who'd refused to accept that impossible was permanent. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind came down from the mountains just right, ranch hands swore they could hear a woman's voice in the corral, patient and steady, talking to horses like they were equals, promising them safety, offering them trust, proving that broken things could be made whole if someone cared enough to try. The Vale Ranch breeding program became the standard by which all others were measured. Rowena's methods were taught in universities, written about in journals, studied by horsemen across the world. And every foal born with Tempest's bloodline carried forward the proof that one woman's stubborn refusal to accept defeat could change everything. She'd walked into chaos wearing a funeral dress and carrying only her dignity, and she'd built an empire from it. Not an empire of land or wealth, but of trust, respect, and the bone-deep knowledge that worth wasn't something you were born with or married into. It was something you earned through patience, honesty, and the courage to keep trying when everyone else had given up. That was the legacy. Not the horses or the money or the fame, but the simple revolutionary truth that no one was beyond saving if someone was willing to see them truly. That fear could be healed, that trust could be rebuilt, that second chances were real if you were brave enough to take them. And in the end, that truth outlasted everything else, the buildings, the business, even the bloodlines. Because the real dynasty Rowena built wasn't written in stud books or bank accounts. It was written in the hearts of every person she'd taught, every horse she'd gentled, every impossible thing she'd made possible through sheer stubborn insistence that love was stronger than fear. The Montana mountains stood eternal, bearing witness to all of it. The wind carried stories across the valley. And on a hill overlooking the ranch, 2 stones stood side by side, a woman and a horse who'd saved each other, and in doing so, proved that broken was just another word for ready to be made whole.